Chapter 166. After getting up in the morning, Sang Sang combed Ning Kei's hair and fetched some hot water. Then she went out of the shop and bought 2 bowls of hot and sour noodle soup with 2 spoonfuls of minced beef. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, Ning Kei put on an unlined robe and began to have breakfast. Sang Sang took out clothes and shoes to match them. Last night, the academy's spring clothes had been ironed tightly and the shoes and socks were all new. Ning Kei's serious and dignified handling of his clothes over the years could only be compared to last spring on the opening day of the academy. With Song Song's help, Ning Kei began to put on his clothes. He held the brand new densely woven fine flower belt with both hands and pulled it hard. Sang Sang picked up a lot of tokens from the bedside and stuffed them into his belt. It took her a long time to stuff them all into his belt. Ning Kei took the quaint and small wooden token from her hand. His fingertips slowly stroked the smooth lines on it. He wondered why His Majesty gave him this waist token of the Imperial Center Administration last night, and it seemed to have existed for many years. The waist token should have been tied to the belt instead of being stuffed into the clothes. But Ning Kei had too many waist tokens in his hands: the waist token of the Secret Guard, the waist token of the Academy, the waist token of the second floor of the Academy, the waist token of a visiting minister given by the Fish Dragon Gang last year, and the new waist token of the Imperial Center Administration. If he hung all of them on his waist, he could totally go dancing. Ning Kei touched the bulging bulge on his waist and twisted it in front of Sang Sang. He said, "I've been in Chang'an for a year and earned a lot of money and tokens. But your young master's waist is not thick enough. If there are more tokens in the future, I'm afraid I won't be able to hang them." Sang Sang looked up at him and said with a smile, "Young master, don't be so proud, okay?" Ning Kei said proudly, "I have to pretend to be quiet and gentle outside. Why can't I be proud at home?" Outside the front door of the old brush pen shop, the horse carriage had been quietly waiting in the alley under the morning light. But today, old Duan did not wait in the carriage, but stood outside the shop with a very respectful look. The coachman old Duan did not know about the second floor of the academy, nor did he know about the flower blooming on the opposite shore heaven. But he was called over by the boss of the carriage and horse shop last night and was warned. His boss told him that he was lucky and that he must serve Ning Kei well in the future. Therefore, he took out the energy that he used to serve his wife at home and got up in the middle of the night. He changed into a set of clean clothes and brushed his teeth with a willow branch dipped in expensive powder for the first time. He also brushed the horse carriage clean and shiny and arrived at Lin 47th Street ahead of time to wait. Looking at the clean coachman and horse carriage, Ning Kei could not help but feel a little surprised. After asking a few questions, he guessed that the boss of the carriage and horse shop probably knew something. He could not help but smile and shake his head, thinking that it was hard not to be proud. The carriage gradually moved away from the eastern city and went out of the south gate of Chang'an via the Vermilion Bird Avenue. It went on the official road of the Empire and headed towards the fairyland-like academy in the distance. Ning Kei looked at the green trees and wildflowers along the road outside the window with a calm expression. He had seen the spring scenery on this road so many times that it could no longer arouse his thoughts. After looking at it for a while, he put down the curtain. Sitting in the slightly shaking carriage, he slowly closed his eyes. The fatigue and tension of the past few days had long left his body. But this was the first time that he had a chance to calmly recall the experience of these days. The morning light passed through the curtain and then through the eyelids, turning into a very dim light, which was very similar to the light intensity of the wilderness that was about to usher in the night. His thoughts instantly drifted back to those strange dreams and the strange illusions he saw during the process of climbing the mountain. After a long time, Ning Kei opened his eyes and shook his head. In the previous time, he once again reviewed the intertwining of light and darkness, the calling from the farthest place between heaven and earth and the deepest heart, and then found that these had nothing to do with him. If the last step was the test of the academy, why would the grand cultivator of the academy make such a mysterious allusion, and why would he be right? The selection test before climbing to the top of the back mountain of the academy was too metaphysical and too solemn. And Ning Ke was just a weak cultivator who had just entered the no-doubt state. Asking him to answer this question was like asking a philosophy professor of Heidelberg University to catch a child who had just entered elementary school. Who are you, where do you come from, and where do you want to go? The boy would not have held his head in his hands and pondered for half a century until he had turned into a statue and could not answer, but he would have answered in a loud voice, "My name is Soanvich, I come from Frankfurt, and I am going fishing in the Neckar." Perhaps the philosophy professor of Heidelberg University also taught theology, or perhaps this professor was similar to the Zen masters in ancient China, who liked to play the trick of returning to the original and returning to the original. Hearing this answer, Ning Ke's thin body shook violently. He felt that the child's answer seemed simple, but in fact it was not simple. He found the ultimate path directly from the heart, and increasingly felt that the child was a rare genius. He was about to officially enter the second floor of the academy to study, but to be honest, until now he still did not know why the academy, why the long mountain road, and why the bigwigs who set up the illusion selection would choose him. After thinking for a long time, Ning Ke could only come to this conclusion. The headmaster of the academy is too profound, so he is confused, and I am that child. On the wide straight road in the southwest of Chang'an, several carriages and dozens of knights were silently moving forward. These carriages were mainly decorated in black and gold, exuding an indescribable sense of luxury and solemnity. Although the dozens of knights were not wearing armor, their neat black robes and determined expressions on their faces still exuded a sense of sacredness and inviolability. These knights were the world-renowned papal guardians of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, known as the world's most elite cavalry. The carriages that were qualified to be protected by them were undoubtedly bigwigs from the Divine Hall. It was still early at this time, but the carriages appeared on the road south of Chang'an, indicating that they had left Chang'an as soon as the city gate opened. If the team consisting of bigwigs from the Divine Hall and papal guardians were walking in other countries, it would definitely attract countless onlookers and cheers, and there might even be many believers kowtowing on the road. But now they were in the territory of the Tang Empire, and it was still early. No one on either side of the road looked at them, and no one offered pious tears. The team just moved forward silently and quickly, giving people a feeling that they wanted to leave as soon as possible at all costs. Prince Long Qing sat in the middle of the luxurious yet solemn black and gold horse carriage. His calm eyes looked through the window at the Tang people's houses and the fields of rape flowers that looked like golden blankets. He listened to the sound of the horses' hooves and the knights' breathing. He felt the oppressive atmosphere and the strange silence. Suddenly, he smiled and said, "When you came, the whole Chang'an city was in jubilation. The believers, women and children lined the road to welcome you, and fruits and flowers were thrown at the carriages. But when you leave, you are so silent and even deliberately choose to leave when the city gate is open. Don't you think you are like a stray dog?" Sitting opposite him, Priest Moli, the deputy head of the Revelation Institute, slightly changed his expression. He did not understand why Prince Long Qing would say such a thing. He forcibly suppressed his anger and said, "Why do you humiliate yourself like this?" Prince Long Qing showed a faint expression of ridicule and said, "No matter where the papal guardians are in the world, they wear golden armor and shine like gods. But when you enter the territory of the Tang people, you have to take off your armor and hand over your spear. Otherwise, you are not allowed to enter. This is a real humiliation." Before Moli said anything, he continued with a smile, "Deputy head, do you know why I live in the Peach Alley in Chang'an City?" Priest Moli was slightly shocked. He did not know whether Prince Long Qing was trying to test him. But looking at his smiling face, he did not know why his heart became colder and colder. After a moment of hesitation, he honestly answered, "Because the prince's natal item is the peach blossom." "Yes, then do you know why I chose the peach blossom as my natal item?" Prince Long Qing asked. Priest Moli shook his head. People in the West Hill Divine Palace did not know the real reason. Because when the headmaster of the academy entered the West Hill, he drank wine and cut down all the peach blossoms on the Divine Mountain. But no one dared to stop him. Prince Long Qing looked out the window at the beautiful rape fields and said calmly, "This is the biggest humiliation that the West Hill Divine Palace has suffered in the past 100 years. I chose the peach blossom as my natal item to remind myself not to forget this humiliation." He continued indifferently, "This time, I lowered myself to accept the test of the second floor of the academy because I want to have the opportunity to learn from the headmaster of the academy. I hope that I can avenge this humiliation on behalf of the Divine Hall in the future. But I did not expect that I would be humiliated by Ning Ke again." Priest Moli wanted to comfort him, but found that he could not find any suitable words. "You just said that I was humiliating myself. In fact, you are wrong. Humiliation has nothing to do with who initiated it. It only matters about strength. If I am stronger than others, then those words are ridicule. If I am weaker than others, then those words are self-humiliation. The Tangs can disarm my apologetic divine army, the headmaster of the academy can cut down all the peach blossoms on the mountain, and Ning Ke can force me to flee Chang'an like a dog. It is not because they want to humiliate me, but because they are stronger in some aspects. But I am very grateful for this humiliation. Let me tell you a piece of good news. Maybe I have already taken that step. Now I only hope that Ning Ke can really become strong quickly, so that I can have the opportunity to avenge this humiliation." Hearing this, Priest Moli was shocked and then ecstatic. He thought that if Prince Long Qing could enter the knowing destiny state during the journey, then the Divine Hall might forgive him for the humiliation he brought to the Divine Hall. After repeatedly congratulating him, he had secretly made up his mind to hold on to the prince's thigh more tightly in the future. Suddenly he thought of something and asked in a low voice, "Crown Prince Chongming has returned to the Yen Kingdom. The good news that the prince has entered the knowing destiny state, should we send someone to inform the Emperor of Yen as soon as possible?" Prince Long Qing slightly laughed at himself and said, "What's the point of letting my father know about this? Fighting for the throne? Is the throne of the Yen Kingdom more attractive than the Haotian Great Way?" Priest Moli sincerely suggested, "But the throne should originally belong to you, Prince. It is mine, and it will always be mine." Prince Long Qing recalled the illusions he had seen on the back of the mountain of the academy, especially the great light and great fear he had seen in the last few steps on the edge of the cliff. His face was slightly pale, and then he resolutely said, "Anyone who wants to take away my things will die." He withdrew his hand from the window, and did not know when there was a pink peach blossom between his fingers. He casually inserted the peach blossom on his lapel, wondering if there was a transparent hole under the petals that were full of vitality. Prince Long Qing looked at the smoke from the houses outside the window and the rape flowers in the fields. After a long silence, he calmly smiled and said, "In a few years, I will pull down all these ugly Tang's houses and eradicate all the rape flowers in the fields. Then I will burn them all. I will burn away the evil and filth, and burn away a holy and bright world." The horse carriage stopped by the meadow outside the academy as usual. Ning Ke got off the carriage and found that the atmosphere in the academy today was very different from before. There were still many students standing in the distance, looking at him and discussing. However, the disdain and disgust in their eyes had long been replaced by shock, envy, and a touch of regret. Under these gazes, Ning Ke walked into the academy and nodded slightly to Chang Jingming who was beside the stone steps. Then he saw a little attendant standing in the morning light and waving to him. He could not help but be slightly startled. The little attendant had delicate features, and his little face was very tender, as if it was made of pink and jade. He looked at Ning Ke walking toward him, and then he very respectfully bowed and said, "Young master, I am the attendant of my young master. I have been ordered to bring you up the mountain." The little attendant had to put on the airs of an old master. Ning Ke could not help but laugh and asked, "The question is, who is your young master? And why do you call me young master?" The little attendant chuckled and touched his head. He explained, "My young master is the second son, and the way I address him is the rules set by my young master. You are the youngest one in the back mountain, so I have to call you young master." Ning Ke asked with great interest, "Then, which Mr. Chenpipi is?" The little attendant answered in a childish voice, "He used to be young master. Now that you are young master, he is Mr. 12. Ning Ke was startled, and then he shook his head and said with a smile, "That fat man and young master, it sounds a little strange." The little attendant said seriously, "Actually, I think so too." The path that Ning Ke took to enter the back mountain of the academy today was certainly not the one that had tormented him half to death. The little attendant took him to a secluded alley and went up from a stone path beside the old library. Then they stopped in front of the thick fog that covered the mountain. "Young master, there is also a path on the second floor of the old library. But young master said that today is your first day here, so please go this way." Ning Ke looked at the fog in front of him and subconsciously thought of the fog on the long mountain path the day before yesterday. His body slightly stiffened. After a moment of silence, he looked at the little attendant and asked gently, "Is there anything strange in the fog?" The little attendant laughed and said, "Of course not. I often walk." There was indeed nothing strange in this mountain fog, such as the bamboo leaves that turned into flying swords, the mountain springs that turned into waterfalls, and the small ponds that turned into seas. This mountain fog was very strange. Ning Ke walked only a dozen steps and actually walked to the mountainside of the academy's back mountain. He waved his sleeves and brushed away the last few wisps of fog in front of him. He could not help but be stunned by the mountainside scenery in front of him, which was like a fairyland under the morning light. Looking from the direction of the academy, there was actually such a large flat cliff facing the east side of the steep mountain. On the cliff plateau, there was a mirror-like lake, blooming wildflowers, tranquil grass, and towering ancient trees. There were thousands of kinds of flowers, including peach blossoms, but they were inconspicuous among them. Under the towering ancient trees, there were more than 10 simple houses, with smoke curling up from the chimneys. Behind the houses, there was a silver line pouring down from the cliff. It was actually a waterfall in the far distance. A flock of black birds were chirping and flying between the cliff and the waterfall. In the morning light, such a beautiful scene came into his eyes. Ning Ke was stunned and did not know what to say. Feeling the quiet chi of heaven and earth and the smell of life in the back mountain, a strong thought came into his mind. No matter who wants to destroy such beauty, I will definitely destroy you first. Modified 201112110408, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 167. When I came here for the first time, I was shocked by the beauty of this place, just like you. Chenpipi stood beside Ning Ke without anyone noticing. Ning Ke turned to look at him and asked, "Is it more beautiful than the place where you used to live?" Chenpipi looked at him and wondered if he had guessed his origin. After a moment of silence, he said, solemn, or sacred, in fact, they are not beautiful." He smiled and continued, "Welcome to the real academy." Ning Ke replied with a smile, "It seems that you are my tour guide today." Chenpipi had never heard of the word tour guide, but he could guess what it meant. He smiled and led him to the cliff platform. They walked through the green fields and meadows, stepped on the slightly wet ridges, and walked on a wooden bridge. Then they came to the lake as calm as a mirror. The white water birds in the lake sometimes floated and sometimes sank, hunting for small fish in the water. Whether they succeeded or failed, they proudly raised their heads, swallowed the fish, or shook off the water drops on their feathers. The footsteps on the wooden bridge attracted the attention of the water birds, but they were obviously not afraid of people. Instead, they seemed to be curious and very intelligent. There was a pavilion in the middle of the wooden bridge, and it was very quiet among the lake and water. A woman in a light yellow spring dress of the academy was concentrating on embroidery in the pavilion. Chen Pipi led Ning Ke to the woman and bowed respectfully, "Seventh sister." The woman in light yellow raised her head and glanced at Ning Ke beside him. She said with a smile, "Show youngest brother around." Ning Ke bowed with hands folded in front and said respectfully, "Seventh sister." Seventh sister glanced at Chen Pipi with a faint smile and suddenly said, "From now on, you can be lazy." Chen Pipi smiled awkwardly. Ning Ke did not understand and looked at the two blankly. Seventh sister did not say anything and continued to embroider. After walking out of the pavilion and crossing the lake to the shore along the wooden bridge, Chen Pipi looked back and introduced to Ning Ke, "Seventh sister is Mu Yu, an expert in tactical arrays. The fog you passed through when you went up the mountain was set up by the predecessors of the academy. Now she is responsible for the maintenance of the tactical array. As for embroidery, seventh sister encountered a bottleneck 2 years ago, and neither eldest brother nor second brother could find a good way. Finally, the headmaster decided to let her embroider. She has been embroidering for 2 years, and I don't know if she has passed the bottleneck." Ning Ke was still shocked in his heart, but he kept calm on the surface. This was the first time he entered the second floor of the academy, and he had no idea about many things. For example, what was the relationship between embroidery and tactical arrays? But because he had no idea at all, he knew that even if he asked, it would be useless, so he remained silent. Chen Pipi led him past the extremely tall ancient tree and walked to the dense forest in the west. Listening to the melodious sound of zither and flute, he said, "The one who plays the flute is 9th brother Beigong Weiyang, and the one who plays the zither is 10th brother Shimen Buhua. They come from the southernmost island and are proficient in temperament. As for what method they are cultivating, I'm afraid that even they themselves don't know." Ning Ke asked in surprise, "What do you mean? How can a cultivator not know his own method of cultivation?" Chen Pipi shook his head and explained, "The headmaster never assigns them homework, but just lets them play these useless things freely. I have been listening to them play for many years in the academy, and I have never seen them do anything else." The sound of zither and flute in the spring forest suddenly stopped, and then there was a rustling sound. 2 men walked out of the forest. The 2 men were handsome and calm, wearing the white academy spring clothes, which had obviously been modified. The sleeves and hem of the robe were very wide, and when the spring wind blew, they looked like immortals. They did not look like students, but more like sage-like hermits. 9th brother, who was holding the flute, looked at Chen Pipi and said angrily, "What do you mean by, 'even I myself don't know'?" Chen Pipi said with a smile, "Then tell me, what on earth have you been cultivating in the academy for so many years?" 9th brother picked up the flute and hit Chen Pipi's head hard without hesitation. Chen Pipi covered his head and shouted angrily, "9th brother, how can you hit me when you can't win an argument? What happened to your elegant demeanor?" The man who had been silent beside holding the zither suddenly said, "Good hit." Chen Pipi looked at the man and said, "10th brother, you have never been such a person." 10th brother Shimen Buhua smiled and gently held the zither in his hands in front of him. His fingertips slightly trembled and plucked out a broken sound. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Youngest brother, senior brother Beigong and I are cultivating the great way of music. A layman like Pipi who only knows how to fight with the chi of heaven and earth can never understand the beauty of music. I hope you are not such a layman." 9th brother Beigong Weiyang put the flute in his waist and looked at Ning Ke with great interest and said, "Youngest brother, when I saw you climbing the mountain that day, you were quite free and easy. Master Yen Sei also said that you have the potential of a divine talisman master, and I heard that you are a famous calligrapher in Chang and recently. In this case, you must have some attainments in art. You and I should have a good competition in the future." Ning Ke hurriedly bowed respectfully, but he thought bitterly in his heart that he did not know anything about music. As for whether it was vulgar or not, Being able to perceive the chi of heaven and earth should of course be used to improve one's state and then learn fighting skills. These two senior brothers actually put all their cultivation and lives into music. It was elegant, but it was a waste of God's gift. Senior brothers, I don't know anything about the way of music, he hurriedly replied. Ninth brother Baigong Weiyang did not take it seriously. He waved his sleeves and said, music and calligraphy are beautiful things in heaven and earth. The word art stresses on understanding by analogy. You didn't have a chance in the past, but now you have met me and your 10th brother. How can you know nothing about it? Seeing their enthusiasm, Ning Ke was too embarrassed to refuse. So he promised that in the future when he was free from studying in the academy, he would respectfully ask these two senior brothers for advice on the way of music. Even if he could not learn anything, it would be good to be an audience. Hearing this, the two senior brothers showed joy on their faces and praised together, "You are indeed not a layman like Pippi." On the way to the house on the cliff plateau under the big tree, Chen Pippi glanced at Ning Ke and asked seriously, "Do you really like to listen to the sound of flute and zither?" Ning Ke glanced at him and said, "Not at all. You don't have to look at me like this. This is my first day in the second floor of the academy. How can I refuse two senior brothers who are so enthusiastic?" Chen Pippi said bitterly, "You idiot, of course you should firmly refuse this kind of thing." Ning Ke did not understand and asked, "If senior brothers want to play flute for me in the future, I can just avoid it. What's the problem?" These years, no senior brother or senior sister is willing to quietly listen to their performance. They can only face each other and play flute and zither every day. One is happy, the other is sad. They flatter each other and are already bored to the extreme. What they lack is an audience. Since you have promised them, you can wait to be dragged to the back mountain every day to be an audience. Ning Ke asked confusedly, "Are you two senior brothers very poor in the way of music? If you two senior brothers were in the world, you would definitely be the first-class rhythmic masters." Chen Pippi said with a straight face. Soon after, his eyebrows drooped down bitterly as he continued, "But no matter how amazing a musician is, if you listen to the same song over and over again for 1,000 times, you will know the pain within. Would he get tired of eating 1,000 bowls of hot and sour noodle slices? Would Sang Sang get tired of eating 1,000 bowls of cabbage heads in vinegar? Would he get tired of taking Sang Sang to the building of pines and cranes to eat 1,000 bowls of noodles in a row? Of course he would get tired of listening to the same song for 1,000 times in a row, and it would be very painful. Ning Ke asked with a trembling voice, "There are countless people in the world who love Rhythmic Master. I think you two senior brothers won't let me listen to it alone. There are many people in the world who love Rhythmic Master, but in your opinion, there are very few people who are qualified to listen to their music. Those who can enter the back mountain of the academy and become their classmates have all passed the test of the headmaster of the academy. Of course they are qualified, but others are not." After a long silence, Ning Ke said resolutely, "I will avoid it. I used to avoid it." Chen Pippi looked at him sympathetically and sighed, "The back mountain of the academy is not small, but it is still possible to find someone." When Ning Ke was about to say something, he suddenly found that the flowering tree beside the stone path was shaking. A person whose face could not be seen clearly suddenly rushed out, which startled him. When he looked closely, he found that it was a young senior brother whom he met on the top of the mountain that day. But today, this senior brother's hair and clothes were all covered with all kinds of flower petals, which looked very funny and a little scary. Chen Pippi pulled him to his side and introduced him very seriously, "This is 11th brother, Wang Qi." Ning Ke hurriedly tidied up his clothes and bowed deeply, "Greetings, 11th brother." 11th brother stared at him and did not return the bow. Instead, he picked up a petal on his shoulder and asked blankly, "Let me ask you, if there is nothing outside your heart and nothing outside your heart, but before the headmaster of the academy entered the back mountain, this flower has bloomed and withered in the mountain for thousands of years. What does it have to do with our hearts?" If no one enters the back mountain, if no one sees this flower does not exist. Ning Ke was speechless. After a long silence, he turned his head and looked at Chen Pipi innocently. Chen Pipi's gaze was even more innocent than his, which meant that if Ning Ke could not answer clearly, it would not be good for him to leave. 11th brother Wang Qi looked at him tenderly and waited for a long time without an answer. But he did not show any displeasure on his face. He explained himself gently, in my opinion, before you and I see this flower, the flower and our hearts are silent. When you and I come to see this flower, the flower appears and blooms in our hearts. Whether this flower exists or not depends on the moment when it appears. Ning Ke slightly opened his mouth, still speechless, and looked very innocent. Chen Pipi felt a little guilty because of this guy's innocent look. He coughed twice and said, 11th brother, it is the first day that youngest brother entered the back mountain. I have to take him to meet other senior brothers. Can we talk about the flower's heart later? Wang Qi looked at Ning Ke warmly and said, youngest brother, if you have spare time in the future, can you help me to think about it? Ning Ke heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly agreed. Then he followed Chen Pipi and ran away from the flowering trees towards the houses under the ancient trees on the cliff plateau. He did not notice the sympathetic look on Chen Pipi's face. I haven't recovered yet. I feel like vomiting while writing. It seems that I lack pressure. Well, I can put more pressure on myself. I will guarantee 6,000 words tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 168. There was a stove in the house and a water wheel outside. The house was filled with white steam both inside and outside. Ning Ke and Chen Pipi stood obediently outside the threshold and watched the naked strong man playing with the fire and iron as if he was treating his beloved lover. After a long time, the noise in the room finally stopped. The strong man took off his leather apron and wiped the sweat on his face with a towel. He walked to the door and said with a simple and honest smile, I'm your 6th senior brother. Chen Pipi said to Ning Ke with a smile, the armors and weapons made by 6th brother are unparalleled in the world. The armor that General Su Shi is wearing now was made by 6th brother. If you need it in the future, you can directly ask senior brother for it. Senior brother is the most amiable and kind person. Although he doesn't like to talk much, he will definitely do what he promised you. During that period of time, Ning Ke had been staring at 6th brother hammering and smithing. He vaguely felt something very interesting from 6th brother's extremely rhythmic and powerful movements. Now listening to Chen Pipi's introduction and thinking of the 3 knives and arrows hidden in Lin 47th Street, his eyes suddenly brightened and he exclaimed, 6th brother is a talisman Taoism master. If you want to classify the methods, I should be considered as a martial arts cultivator. But I don't have time to learn how to fight in this life. I only know how to hammering. 6th brother answered honestly, youngest brother, I know what you want to ask. The armors and weapons I made do have talisman inscriptions, but that has nothing to do with me. It's 4th brother's work. 4th brother? Ning Ke asked in surprise. 6th brother looked at the dark corner of the house and said with a smile, that's him. Ning Ke then noticed that there was a very small sand table in the dark corner, and a man in a Cyan Academy spring suit was sitting beside it. The temperature in the house was extremely high, but the man didn't have a drop of sweat on his body. He didn't even feel hot. He just focused on the small sand table in front of him. He was like a part of the house, which could easily escape the eyes. If you closed your eyes, you couldn't even feel that he was sitting there. 4th senior brother has been cultivating the turbid light talisman recently. Chen Pipi explained to him, he wants to make the runes and the steel that make up the weapon even more closely, until they become one. 4th brother, who was sitting in the dark corner, raised his head and ignored Ning Ke and Chen Pipi. He directly said to the naked strong man, "It's not a problem to use the 3 stars pattern to increase the frontal impact resistance, but what about the tearing force on the side? If a martial artist spreads the heaven-earth yuan qi on the surface of their skin, it will be difficult to activate the runes on the armor." Sixth brother walked over there, followed by Ning Ke and Chen Pipi. There were 3 seemingly simple lines drawn on the sand table. These lines were not completely straight. A few extremely smooth semicircular arcs were drawn where the lines intersected. It looked like a line holding a few drops of water that were about to fuse but had yet to completely fuse. Listening to the discussion of the 2 senior brothers, Ning Ke knew that they wanted to modify the runes on the armor to improve the defense ability. This was the first time that he saw the application of talisman Taoism in reality, so he couldn't help but feel curious. "I don't know talisman Taoism, nor do I know what these patterns are for. But I always feel that these semicircles are too smooth, or too perfect." Sixth brother scratched his head and said honestly, "I just feel that things that are too perfect can't be beaten." After a long silence, fourth brother said, "You have been forging iron all your life, so you are more familiar with the power than me. Although I don't know how it works, I believe in your intuition. These semicircles are really too perfect." Ning Ke felt a little nervous and stared at the sand table paved with fine white sand. He wanted to see what kind of changes fourth brother was going to make. No one drew a picture with a wooden brush. The fine white sand on the sand table magically and quickly rolled. The lines on the sand table seemed to be pulled by an invisible hand and changed shape. No one knew how many combinations had been made in a moment. Ning Ke stared at the lines on the sand table. His eyes flashed quickly along with the changes of those lines. His thinking gradually couldn't keep up with those extremely complicated combinations. He only felt a slight pain in his mind and a wave of annoyance in his chest and abdomen. Walking out of the house to the water wheel, Ning Ke held a handful of cold water to wash his face. Only then did he feel a little better. He looked at Chen Pipi with lingering fear and said, "I really didn't expect that these fragments of talisman Taoism are so difficult to understand. It's because they are fragments that it is easy to cause mental fluctuations. Not to mention that you overestimated yourself and wanted to see so many changes clearly." Chen Pipi filled a bamboo tube with water and drank it all. He wiped his mouth and said mockingly, "Not to mention that the furnace in sixth brother's house never goes out all year round. It is used to refine various kinds of steel materials. He doesn't know how to fight, but his martial arts cultivation is extremely profound. That's why he is fine staying in there. How can a guy like you not faint from the heat?" Ning Ke was mocked by him, but he didn't feel offended. He thought of these senior brothers and sisters that he saw in the back of the mountain of the academy today. These seemingly crazy but obviously very magical scenes made him very excited. Fifth brother and eighth brother went to play chess. Before they entered the mountain, one was a chess player from the South Jin Kingdom, and the other was a chess master from the Yueluan Kingdom. They had fought more than 10 times and could not decide the winner. After they entered the mountain, they became senior brothers, but they didn't forget about the past. As long as they were free, they would hold the chess pieces and sit under the pine tree on the mountain for several days. Chen Pipi thought of the 2 senior brothers and said angrily, "They often forget to eat because of playing chess. How could they remember that today is the day you entered the academy? If I hadn't searched all over the mountain to bring them meals, I really wonder if they would vomit blood on the chess pieces and then die of hunger and cold, becoming 2 elegant ghosts under the pine tree." Ning Ke was speechless when he heard this. He thought that the back of the mountain of the academy was really full of strange people. He didn't know why the headmaster of the academy accepted these people as students. "Third sister, you are familiar with her?" Chen Pipi continued, "She should still be copying the small regular script in the old library. You can see her whenever you want. Don't ask me why she is copying the small regular script by the east window every day. I only know that it is the homework that the teacher gave her." Recalling the number of people he saw at the top of the cliff that night, Ning Ke silently calculated and said to Chen Pipi, "Eldest brother has followed the headmaster of the academy to travel in the kingdom of Qi, so there should be 2 senior brothers that he hasn't met yet. You haven't met second brother yet. As for the other one, it's not senior brother. That old man's seniority is a bit strange. He only reads books every day and doesn't talk to anyone. Senior brothers and senior sisters don't like to talk to him." Chen Pipi led him to the waterfall behind the cliff plateau and warned him, "I'm going to take you to second brother now. You have to pay attention to your manners. Although the Shixiang and Shiji that I met earlier behaved strangely, they are all very kind people. Second Shixiang is serious and upright, and always asks others to correct him. If you make any mistakes, be careful of being beaten." Ning Ke was shocked and asked nervously, "Then how should I face second brother?" Chen Pipi looked back at him and said mockingly, "You have always been good at putting on airs. Just like how you faced senior brothers and senior sisters just now. I really didn't expect that you, with thick eyebrows and big eyes, would be so good at showing off." Ning Ke said sarcastically, "A wise man submits to circumstances, and an idiot who doesn't." Chen Pipi looked at him and sighed, saying, "In addition to being serious and upright, second brother's biggest characteristic is his pride, and he can't bear to see others behave more arrogantly than him in front of him. So, I'm sorry for your loss. Judging from your usual arrogant attitude, I think second brother must have taught you a lot these years." Ning Ke looked at his chubby face and said mockingly, "As for me, you don't have to worry about me. In front of second brother, I will definitely be the most modest person in the world." "It's too late." Chen Pipi looked at him with a faint smile and said, "The math problem you gave me last year finally caused second brother to close himself for half a month. Do you think someone as proud as him will forget it?" It turned out that Chen Pipi's threat was just a paper tiger. After walking to the small courtyard not far from the silver waterfall and finally seeing the legendary second brother, Ning Ke found that second brother was definitely not a supercilious person. He even felt that second brother's tone was very gentle and kind, without any trace of arrogance and conceit. Standing on the stone steps, second brother looked at them calmly and asked indifferently, "Ning Ke, youngest brother." "Sorry, I shouldn't call him youngest brother now. 12th took you to walk around the back mountain. How do you feel?" Senior brothers and senior sisters are concentrating on cultivation, which is really my. Ning Ke replied respectfully. However, before he finished his words, second brother raised his hand to stop him and said coldly, "Those guys only know how to play with birds, feed fish, play the zither, and play chess every day. How can they be concentrating on cultivation?" Fourth brother obviously has great potential in talisman Taoism, but I don't know what's wrong with his brain. He was actually tricked by sixth brother to be a worker in the blacksmith's shop. Teacher is too kind to care about them. Otherwise, I would have taught them a good lesson. It's really unwise for you to say that they are your role models. Ning Ke didn't know how to answer this. Second brother suddenly asked in a low voice, "What are you looking at?" When he saw the waterfall just now, Ning Ke had set the tone for this conversation and made a lot of psychological preparations. He decided to pretend to be a shy quail in front of second brother and never raise his head to look directly into his eyes rudely during the conversation. However, the ancient crown on second brother's head, which looked like a laundry stick, was really too eye-catching. As for the ancient crown on second brother's head, it was hard for anyone to move their eyes away once they saw it. Ning Ke always felt like he was talking to a wooden club. It was such a weird feeling that even he found it hard to keep a calm expression on his face. Compared with the high ancient crown that looked like a wooden stick, second brother's appearance was much more normal, but also had its own characteristics. Second senior brother had straight eyebrows, a straight nose, and thin lips. He was not handsome, but there was nothing wrong with him. His black hair was neatly combed and hung behind him without a single strand out of place. It did not lean to the left or to the right. As for his two eyebrows, they were exactly the same, even giving people the feeling that the number of eyebrows on both sides was exactly the same. His calm and spirited eyes were the same, and there was no fault to be found. His entire person gave people a helpless feeling that they couldn't praise or find fault with. This feeling of helplessness was probably shared by everyone who saw second brother. It was because of this feeling that Ning Kei's mind drifted slightly. When he suddenly heard this question, he couldn't help but be shocked and said with a smile, "Senior brother, I'm looking at your crown." Second brother looked at him quietly and asked, "Why do you want to see?" Ning Kei's expression was very natural, and he answered naturally, "Because it looks good." Second brother was slightly startled. Chen Pipi, who had been playing the role of a quail, became stiff and silently cursed in his heart. He thought that after knowing this guy for a year, he still didn't fully understand how shameless and despicable he was. No matter how natural flattery was, sometimes it would make the recipient feel a little embarrassed, and embarrassed easily. What's more, the person he was facing today was second brother of the academy. At this important moment, Ning Kei would never give him any chance to reflect and wake up. He randomly chose something in his mind and asked confusedly, "Second brother, when I was on the way back from the grassland to the capital with Princess Li Yu last year, I once met a great sword master in see-through state at the entrance of the northern mountain road of Min Mountain. Some people said that he was an abandoned disciple of the second floor of the academy. It's not that easy to enter the back mountain of the academy. Since you've come in, how can you easily go out?" Second brother said, "The rich have distant relatives deep in the mountain. There are many stupid people in the world who always want to have some relationship with the academy to protect their identity. Every year, there are many abandoned disciples of the second floor. Should the academy announce to the world that there is no such person every time they appear? I'm worried that these arrogant people will ruin the reputation of the academy." What Ning Kei said was his true thought. Second brother said sarcastically, "Those who know will naturally know. As for those who are not qualified to know, no matter what thoughts they have, they are not qualified to affect the reputation of the academy. It seems that you don't need to pay attention to such things in the future." Hearing this, Ning Kei sighed in his heart and thought that he finally felt second brother's pride. It was indeed a very fierce pride. Second brother noticed the meaning in his eyes and thought that this new youngest brother was shocked by what he had seen and heard today and was a little confused. He calmly comforted him, "The back mountain of the academy, or the second floor, is actually not as mysterious as people say. This is the place where the headmaster teaches students. It's as simple as that. Do you feel helpless?" "Yes. Don't you think that second senior brother is really boring? He does everything by the book, right?" "Yes. Do you feel that his hat looks like a wooden stick? After looking at it for a long time, sometimes you suddenly feel that the hat looks like a folded paper toy. No matter what it looks like, do you have the urge to break it or squash it?" After leaving the small courtyard, they could no longer hear the sound of the waterfall falling from the cliff into the pool. After confirming that second brother would not eavesdrop on their conversation, the two youngest guys in the back mountain of the academy began to talk. Chen Pipi rubbed his cheeks, which were a little numb because of his previous serious expression. He looked at Ning Kei and asked, "Say it." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei honestly replied, "I do have this kind of feeling." Chen Pipi looked at him seriously and said, "Not only you, but all of us do. Sixth brother has even tried several times." Ning Kei slightly opened his mouth and looked at the fat lad's face. He hesitated and said, "I don't know how to continue." Chen Pipi shook his head and said, "I'm not stupid enough to trick you to smash second brother's hat. In fact, after seeing your performance today, I firmly believe that it is very likely that you will think of some sinister tricks to trick me to do this happy thing in the future." Ning Kei smiled and suddenly said, "I think it's good for second brother to be proud. At least this is more like a person. I won't take your words as evidence to blackmail you." Chen Pipi's expression and words were obviously different. He patted Ning Kei's shoulder sympathetically and said, "In fact, we all feel the same about this, especially after second brother raised a goose 2 years ago." Ning Kei asked in surprise, "A goose?" Chen Pipi said with a smile, "We always thought that the reason why second brother raised the goose was that the goose was very proud. He felt that he had finally found his own kind. In this case, of course, he should raise it well." Ning Kei was startled and shook his head repeatedly with a smile. He said, "Too mean, too vicious." Chen Pipi said with a smile, "Don't doubt it. You will know why we said that when you see the goose later." As they spoke, they came to a gentle slope where wildflowers were in full bloom on the green meadow. The two of them chose a clean spot among the flowers and sat down. Below the slope was a gently flowing stream, which seemed to be coming from the waterfall on the cliff. It seemed that after flowing out of the cliff, it would form a new waterfall, but they didn't know where it would fall. The spring wind and the warm sun mixed together and gently blew on the faces of the two young people. They lay among the wildflowers on the meadow with their hands behind their heads and opened their eyes to look at the beautiful scenery, looking extremely comfortable. Ning Kei looked at the stream at the bottom of the slope and said, "In the academy. I mean in the academy below, I would occasionally look up at the mountains, but I have never seen a waterfall. I have never thought that the depths of the mountains in the fog could be so beautiful." Chen Pipi squinted and looked at the black spots in the sky. He said with a smile, "This mountain is very big, and there are many places that I haven't been to. I heard from fourth brother that the side of the mountain facing Chang'an City is a precipice. The waterfall that you are concerned about might fall from there. I once went there to take a peek. The bottom of the precipice is full of clouds and mist. I don't know what's down there. Take me there if there is a chance." "Okay." Ning Kei had excellent eyesight. He looked at the fish swimming under the stream and thought of the senior brothers and sisters he saw in the back mountain today. He asked curiously, "Senior brothers and sisters, what state are they in now?" "Second brother has long been in the knowing destiny state, but I don't know whether he is in the upper or middle knowing destiny state, and whether he has seen that door. Third sister to 11th brother, they are all in the see-through state, and the upper, middle or lower states." This answer was really out of Ning Kei's expectation. He looked at Chen Pipi in surprise and said, "You are all in the knowing destiny state. Why are senior brothers and sisters still in the see-through state?" Chen Pipi glanced at him and said sarcastically, "There is a time to learn Taoism, but there is no time to enter Taoism. Although I am the latest to enter the knowing destiny state, it is not a big deal. The so-called state division is just a fighting method. No one in the back of the mountain really cares about it. If we really fight, starting from third sister, all the way to 11th brother, they can't beat me. Don't forget that I am a peerless cultivation genius." "How did senior brothers and sisters enter the academy?" "Of course they were recruited by the headmaster." Chen Pipi did not notice that he had been influenced too much by second brother these years, and started to talk nonsense out of habit. Ning Kei said helplessly, "I am asking a serious question. Could it be that my answer is not serious?" Chen Pipi looked at him gloomily and said, "Who can draw straighter lines than fourth brother? Who was better at embroidery than seventh sister? Who was more exquisite than Chen Fa? Who can play zither and flute better than ninth brother and 10th brother? Who can forge iron better than sixth brother? As for the two crazy chess players, you can't find a third person in the world who can beat them on the chessboard. Our senior brothers and sisters are all the top figures in the world in a certain aspect. Again, they may not be able to beat others in a fight, but in other aspects, you and I can't even catch up with them." Ning Kei said seriously, "That is not necessarily true. When it comes to calligraphy, I still have some confidence." Chen Pipi laughed heartily. Ning Kei also laughed. Suddenly he thought of something and asked confusedly, since senior brothers and sisters were already the top figures in a certain aspect before entering the mountain, why did the headmaster summon them to the academy? They are already invincible in the world, and they will still be invincible if they continue to cultivate. Who can make them go further in their field? Chen Pipi looked at him and said seriously, I said before that no one can beat senior brothers and sisters in their field, but this sentence actually has a premise. We must exclude the existence of one person. Who? Eldest brother. Ning Ke was silent for a long time before he gradually digested the shock in his heart. He stared at his eyes and said, You mean? Eldest brother knows everything and is the strongest person in any field. Chen Pipi sighed slowly and said, I only know that eldest brother has always been responsible for teaching and solving doubts in the back of the mountain of the academy. Ning Ke was stunned and speechless. After a long time, he murmured, How can there be such an all-rounder in the world? Chen Pipi looked up at the birds in the blue sky and said with a smile, Do you feel very depressed? You are very proud, I am very proud, and second brother is even more proud. But even second brother is not qualified to be proud in front of eldest brother. The most interesting thing is that if you see eldest brother, you will find that he does not know what is pride at all. Ning Ke looked at the sky absent-mindedly and said after a long silence, It turns out that in the world, besides, there are really people who are born with knowledge. Chen Pipi did not notice the pause between his words and said, There is no one in the world who is born with knowledge. Ning Ke said sarcastically, If not born with knowledge, who can teach a person like eldest brother? Chen Pipi said sarcastically, Idiot, eldest brother is the teacher's student. Of course, he was taught by the teacher. Ning Ke was speechless and suddenly thought of one thing. Eldest brother's teacher was also his teacher. At this time, he realized that he had become the student of the legendary headmaster of academy. He could not help but feel excited and uneasy. He suddenly turned his head and looked at the big fat round face close to him. He asked, I have a question. Chen Pipi asked doubtfully, What question? Ning Ke said seriously, I entered the second floor of the academy to cultivate and learn, not to enjoy the scenery. You took me around today, but it seems that no one told me what I should learn and how to learn. First of all, you are now in the no-doubt state. The chi of heaven and earth that you can control is pitifully little, so there are many things that you can't learn at all. Secondly, the learning in the back of the mountain is basically self-cultivation. According to the direction set by the teacher, we learn by ourselves. If there is something that we don't understand, we can ask eldest brother. Now that the teacher and eldest brother haven't come back, of course, you can only learn by yourself. Eldest brother, what state is he in now? No one knows except the headmaster of academy. I even suspect that eldest brother doesn't know himself. There you go again. You go again. I'm telling the truth. Because we always feel that eldest brother seems to have never cared about such things as states. I suddenly thought of a question. If eldest senior brother really knows everything and is the top figure in all fields, then why don't fifth senior brother and eighth senior brother pester him to play chess? As far as I know, games like playing chess or football are the most likely to cause violence. No one cares whether the other party is eldest brother or not. Chen Pipi suddenly laughed. He thought of something and couldn't help shaking his head. He sighed and said, That's because eldest brother has two most wonderful characteristics. It is because of these two characteristics that no one will pester him to play chess or do other things. What characteristics? Ning Ke asked curiously. Eldest brother does things very seriously, very seriously. So he moves very slowly, very slowly. How slowly? You can't imagine it. Even if I have to wait for the headmaster of academy to return, I have to do something in the back mountain. You will have a lot of things to do in the future. Ning Ke suddenly felt that something was wrong. He hesitated and asked, For example. Chen Pipi looked at him sympathetically and said, For example. At this moment, Ning Ke finally remembered that when he visited his senior brothers and sisters in the academy today, Chen Pipi occasionally showed a look of pity. He vaguely guessed something and asked in a low voice, now that I have become the youngest brother, do you feel that your life has ushered in a new and joyful stage? Chen Pippi looked at him with a smile and said, yes. In the future, I will no longer be forced to listen to those elegant songs every day. I will no longer be forced by fourth brother to draw lines on the sand table every day. I will no longer be forced by sixth brother to step on the water cart every day. I will no longer be forced by seventh sister to plant flags and draw lines in the fog every day. I will no longer be forced by 11th brother to discuss those misty things every day. I will no longer be forced by second brother to calculate those mountain-like numbers every day. Ning Ke said thoughtfully, because I am the youngest now. Chen Pippi patted him on the chest and said gratefully, the academy wins because of the youngest brother. Ning Ke smiled and pushed his hand away. He rested his hand on his pillow and looked up at the sky. He thought that he had to cherish today's leisure time and did not want to talk to him anymore. I know you are a person with big ideas and big ambitions. Chen Pippi suddenly looked up at the sky and said, you cared about the states of senior brothers and sisters because you wanted to surpass them. In fact, I personally do not agree with this way of life, because it is too tiring. Ning Ke did not look back at him. He stared at the birds flying lower and lower in the blue sky. He looked at their soft white bellies under their black wings and murmured, living is a tiring thing. I don't know what you experienced when you were a child, but I think sometimes you need to be broad-minded. Are you saying that I am a narrow-minded person? That my crab porridge was fed to pigs? You know that's not what I mean. I mean you don't need to guard against senior brothers and sisters. They are all good people. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, when I was 4 years old, I met a good person, and then I found that the good person wanted to eat me. Of course, I don't think senior brothers and sisters are such people. But I just met them, and it is inevitable that I will be a little defensive. You don't need to worry too much about me becoming a psychopath. If I wanted to be a psychopath, I would have changed when I was a child. Chen Pippi turned to look at his side face and said, at least here, you really don't need to be too vigilant. You can relax and live a happy life. The back of the mountain of the academy is a good place. You should cherish it. I understand. I will cherish it. Ning Ke said seriously, you have stayed in the back of the mountain for so many years. Are you bored? Of course, sometimes. Otherwise, how could I know you? Ning Ke looked back at him and asked curiously, when will you return to West Hill? Chen Pippi did not know what unbearable memory this question reminded him of, and his expression was a little ugly. Ning Ke stared at his eyes and asked seductively, is it related to women? Chen Pippi swallowed with difficulty and said in a slightly hoarse voice, it has nothing to do with you. Ning Ke laughed and bumped his shoulder. He asked, speaking of which, what kind of women do you like? Mature men often talked about money and things in bed when they talked about women, while young men would talk about simple things like liking women. But no matter what kind, women were always the most interesting subjects to talk about. Hearing this question, Chen Pippi suddenly became interested and said, do you remember what I wrote in my first letter? Ning Ke nodded. Forget about those. Those were just me scolding people. Chen Pippi said with a smile, the girl I like must have long black hair, a small figure, and clean eyes. Of course, she must be good-looking. It would be best if she can have a red face. Ning Ke asked in surprise, that's it? After thinking for a moment, Chen Pippi added with a solemn expression, it doesn't matter if she is independent and strong, even if she is fierce. No woman can beat a cultivation genius like me, but she must be a good person. Ning Ke always felt that there seemed to be some years of pain hidden in this sentence. But thinking that when Chen Pippi escaped from West Hill and came to the academy, he was only a little more than 10 years old, so it was impossible for him to have a love debt, Ning Ke could not help but feel confused. At this moment, Chen Pippi's eyes suddenly brightened. He pointed to the stream at the foot of the slope and said, look, that's second brother's goose. A fat big white goose walked to the stream, shaking its big butt. It had a small bamboo basket in its mouth, and no one knew what was in the basket. It put its thick hard beak into the bamboo basket, and then into the calm flowing stream. There was a sound of disturbance in the stream. Countless fish swam over happily and gathered in front of the big white goose, pecking at it from time to time. However, it seemed to be very orderly. After eating, the fish quickly retreated and made way for the fish behind them. The big white goose looked up from the water, proudly raising its white neck and quacking twice to the sky. Then it put the things in the bamboo basket into the stream again, and then kept repeating this action, showing great patience. Ning Kai was directly shocked by the scene by the stream. The big white goose was actually feeding the fish. The goose raised by second brother comes to feed the fish every day, as if it is proud to think that this is the most important task in its life. It is just like second brother scolds us every day, and he is proud to think that this is the most important task in his life. Chen Pipi stood beside him and said with a smile. Ning Kai was shocked and speechless, thinking that the back of the mountain of the academy was really the most awesome place in the world. After crossing Min Mountain and going all the way north, there was a naturally formed pass in the far north wilderness, which was even more desolate than the wilderness. In the wilderness south of the pass, a team of thousands of women, children, old and weak were walking with difficulty. The night this year was much longer than in previous years, and the temperature became colder. The tribes of the Great Northern Wilderness, which were known for their ability to withstand the cold, could no longer bear the increasingly harsh environment. They were forced to leave their hometown where they had lived for more than 1,000 years, stepping on the melted mud of snow and mud to move south. The tribes of the Great Northern Wilderness, which consisted of hundreds of thousands of people, had been away from the Central Plains for too long, so long that many people had forgotten the existence of the southern region in the world, and so long that they had long been forgotten by the prosperous and rich world. As the night lengthened and the temperature dropped, apart from these poor tribal people, the animals and beasts that originally lived in colder areas were the first to give up. Listening to the faint shrill cries coming from the far north of the pass, the respectable old people in the migrating tribes had a solemn expression on their faces, and their wrinkles were full of sadness and helplessness. As for the women in furs, their eyes were full of despair. As hunters for a living, they could clearly judge the scale of this group of beasts invading south from the extremely cold region from the screams. If these ferocious beasts caught up with the tribe, then the tribe would usher in a disaster. The pass was a mess, and the snow was full of stains. A young girl wrapped tightly in rotten fur stood in the snow. She wore a pair of black boots, and her beautiful black hair was braided into a large braid under her leather hat, swaying gently behind her to her knees. The beast tail on her collar did not cover her fresh and cute eyes, and her little face was flushed red from the cold wind. She did not look more than 15 years old. Listening to the mournful cries of the wild beasts, she tightly gripped the hilt of her knife and stared at the black line in the distance. Her body trembled slightly because of her nervousness, but her clear eyes became brighter and brighter. The sound of hooves became clearer, and the faint eyes of the snow wolves appeared on the wilderness like stars. The atmosphere was depressing and horrible. The girl looked there nervously, and suddenly shouted in a childish voice, "Tang Xiao Tang, you want to be the strongest woman in the world. Of course you won't die so early." As soon as she finished speaking, she pulled the knife out of the snow. The knife was red, very curved and big, longer and wider than her small body. She held it on her shoulder, like a bloody crescent moon. She held the red moon knife, shouting like a madwoman, and rushed to the snowfield dire wolves all over the mountains and wilderness. "It's very rough, I will fix the first chapter tomorrow, but it's enough to be awesome. 9,500 words, and the last picture, I am relieved. The goose feeding the fish is a real story, but I forgot that it was a goose from Tongji or Fudan University. I also think it's awesome. To be continued." If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 169. All the way to the south, fighting with wild beasts everywhere, fighting against hunger and cold, the fur of the snowfield direwolves was stuck together by blood and dirty water, stained with dirt, and the original snow-white color could no longer be seen. Because of the long-term starvation, their bodies were extremely thin, and the bones above their forelegs were protruding. From time to time, stinky saliva dripped from their bloody mouths, which were exhaling hot mist. However, no matter how weak they were, the snowfield direwolves were still the kings of this extremely cold world. Hundreds of huge wolves, which were as big as small mountains, stood side by side in the wilderness with a sense of discipline, like an insurmountable continuous mountain range. The snowfield direwolves silently rushed to the front of the mountain pass, and coldly stared at the little girl who was rushing towards them, as if they were watching a piece of moving fresh meat. Several young male wolves behind them were a little restless, but they did not dare to make any rash moves. Their breathing became more and more intense, and the light in their eyes became more and more ferocious and greedy. A low roar came from the wolf pack, and a strong snowfield direwolf rushed out of the wolf pack alone. It lowered its head and opened its mouth, panting like a mountain, and rushed towards the girl at the mountain pass. Even if a snowfield direwolf was on all fours, it was still taller than the two girls combined. The contrast between the huge wolf body and the small body easily produced a sense of despair, and the thunder-like running sound intensified this sense of despair. The jumping distance of the snowfield direwolf was extremely terrifying. It seemed to be rushing forward clumsily, but in fact, it was very fast. In the blink of an eye, the snowfield direwolf had rushed hundreds of feet away, and rushed to the girl. The snowfield direwolf's strong hind legs suddenly stomped on the ground, and its upper back suddenly sank. It exerted all its strength, and its claws slapped towards the little girl's body like lightning. A huge shadow appeared in the wilderness, and two furry and stinky claws tore the cold air, covering Tang Xiaotong's fresh and lovely face almost at the same time as the shadow. However, there was no fear in her eyes. She slightly bent her legs, and her body bounced up in an extremely strange way, avoiding the pounce, and bounced up 10 meters high into the air. Tang Xiaotong, who had bounced into the air, looked down at the tall snowfield direwolf from above. She held the huge machete tightly with both hands and chopped down hard. A red moon tore through the cold air and accurately chopped the middle of the wolf's head, making a crisp sound. The eyeballs of this strong snowfield direwolf seemed to be bigger than a human head. As a very thin bloody wound suddenly appeared on the wolf's head, the bloodthirsty and indifferent expression in these two terrifying eyeballs suddenly turned into a sense of despair. With a soft sound, Tang Xiaotong's black leather boots stepped heavily on the ground of the wilderness, cracking a few pieces of thin ice that had just been frozen. She dragged the ridiculously heavy machete and quickly walked out of the shadow under her feet. The huge body of the snowfield direwolf collapsed like a mountain, and of course, it did not hit Tang Xiaotong. She stared at a certain direction in the wolf pack, and a trace of determination flashed across her fresh and lovely face. Dragging the huge machete, she suddenly accelerated in the splashing dust of the wolf's body, and once again sprinted towards the mountain-like giant wolf pack in front of her. An extremely overbearing roar came from the back of the snowfield direwolf pack. One could vaguely feel the irritation and anger after its dignity was challenged in the roar. With this low roar, the whole wolf pack began to roar, and the frozen wilderness ground trembled slightly. Hundreds of prairie snowfield direwolves quickly spread out and began to besiege the girl. The huge and heavy red machete was dragged on the black wilderness ground, making a harsh friction sound, and from time to time, a few faint sparks could be seen. Tang Xiaotong did not seem to care that the ridiculously huge machete in her hand would be worn by the hard ground. She just gritted her teeth and lowered her head, continuing to rush forward. Only when the giant wolves rushed to her did she raise the huge machete with difficulty to chop it down. The heavy and huge machete was lifted with difficulty, and slowly chopped down, like a red crescent moon moving randomly in the night sky. However, those snowfield dire wolves, which were like wind and thunder, could not avoid such a slow machete. Under the red crescent moon, they howled and fell to the ground, and their huge legs flew everywhere with blood gushing out. In an instant, 3 snowfield dire wolves fell under the girl's red machete. 2 snowfield dire wolves howled and jumped down from the sky, and the strong wind with a foul smell hit Tang Xiaotang's beast tail around her neck, making a sound. She bent her legs and bounced into the air again. However, the snowfield dire wolves were very intelligent, and they had already guessed her next move when they besieged her. A strong wind came from the side, and a snowfield dire wolf made a successful sneak attack and directly knocked her into the air. In front of Tang Xiaotang, there were already 3 snowfield dire wolves roaring and leaping up. Their sharp claws had already stretched out from the festering fur, and were ready to tear her petite body apart like a knife. A childish and angry voice sounded in the wilderness. Tang Xiaotang forcibly twisted her body in the air, and the huge red machete in her hand swept across everything like lightning. The strong air splashed in front of the blade, and she barely blocked the insidious ambush of the wolves, avoided the 6 horrible claws, and hit the head of a snowfield dire wolf dangerously. Tang Xiaotang stretched out her hand and grabbed the hair of the dire wolf. She twisted her wrist, and the blade drew a strange arc, and directly pierced into the dire wolf's eye socket. With a shrill and painful howl, she jumped down from the dire wolf, and dragged the huge machete on her feet. Panting, she sprinted to the center of the dire wolf group again. There was no expression on her face, and there was no fear or excitement in her clear eyes, but only extraordinary firmness, as if no danger or difficulty, even the horrible death, could stop her. The battle between the little girl and the snowfield dire wolves was still going on. At least 7 snowfield dire wolves had fallen under the enchantingly red giant machete, and the corner of her mouth had begun to bleed. No one knew when she was injured in the battle. The red giant machete looked extremely heavy. In the process of advancing, she often had to drag the machete to walk on the ground, which was extraordinarily difficult. It gave people a feeling that she was almost unable to lift the machete. Every time the red giant machete fell to the ground, she always felt that it must be the last time, and she would never have the strength to pick it up again. But the strange thing was, every time at that moment, she could lift the heavy giant machete again. Every time the red giant machete slowly cut through the cold air, she always felt that it must be the last time, and she would never have the strength to cut it again. But the strange thing was, every time at that moment, she would always be able to swing the heavy giant machete. Compared to her small body, the snowfield great wolf's body was like a small hill. She tightly held the huge red machete in her hand, and compared with her small body, it was exaggeratedly like a red moon. The impact of the mountain-like dire wolves could not make her fall down, and the heavy red giant machete could not slow her down. When the snowfield dire wolves rushed in front of her, the red giant machete would definitely cut out slowly but absolutely accurately, leaving a hill-like corpse of the dire wolves. The battle between the girl and the wolves was silent, solemn, boring and chilling. There was no shouting, no rest or pause, only the monotonous collision between the red giant machete and the snowfield dire wolves. If the people in the prosperous southern world had the chance to witness such a battle with their own eyes, if they had the chance to see this adorable little girl covered in ragged fur and blushing face colliding with the terrifying pack of wolves, they would have personally experienced what a real battle was and what kind of attitude was called fearlessness. The fighting wisdom of the snowfield dire wolves absolutely could not be underestimated. Although these kings from the cold region of the far north were fighting in a foreign land today, and although they had been suffering from hunger and cold for a long time, they still could not be resisted by ordinary people. Tang Xiaotang's injuries became more and more serious, and her footsteps became heavier and heavier. The red giant machete in her small hand seemed to become heavier and heavier. Although the wolves still could not force her into a desperate situation, she still could not rush into the depths of the wolf pack. Deep in the wolf pack that had been silent for a long time sounded again, and this time the sound was particularly serious, no longer angry, but with a hint of appreciation. However, when Tang Xiaotang heard the sound, her bright eyes flashed with a bad look. She guessed what the wolves wanted to do, so she waved the red giant machete in her hand and was ready to retreat to the mountain pass. Unexpectedly, she was blocked by several young and strong giant wolves. The Snowfield dire wolves began to divide their forces. They respected the strength of this female human, but they did not want to let go of the tribesmen who were walking slowly in the south of the mountain pass, because those tribesmen were very likely to be their last food this month. 10 young and strong Snowfield dire wolves surrounded Tang Xiaotang. Their smelly mouths were dripping with saliva, and the gray fur on their bodies stood up. They tried their best to keep Tang Xiaotang in the wilderness. More Snowfield dire wolves silently walked behind them, and walked towards the mountain pass. No wolf looked back at the 10 young and strong companions, even if they knew that most of them would die under the machete of the female human. After receiving the order from their leader, the 10 giant wolves' desperate look in their eyes had already turned into ferocity after obedience. They stared at the human girl who was surrounded in the middle, and the wolf claws stretched out of the fur glowed with a steel-like light. Tang Xiaotang suddenly looked back to the south, and her black braid behind her swayed in the wind. Her hair under the leather hat brushed her blood-stained lips. She looked at the wolves that were about to pass through the mountain pass, and thought of the women, children, and the old and weak in the south of the mountain pass. Her bright eyes dimmed. Suddenly, something very strange happened at the mountain pass. The strong Snowfield dire wolf who was responsible for clearing the way was directly shaken into the air by a powerful and terrible force, and turned into a small black shadow, whining in the air, looking like a begging wild dog. Then the second and the third giant wolf were shaken into the air. An unarmed man appeared at the mountain pass. He was casually wrapped in fur-like clothes, and many parts of his body were exposed. His rock-like muscles were as strong as steel, and it seemed that he was not afraid of the cold at all. He completely ignored the angry roaring wolves in front of him, and directly stared at the back of the wolf pack, saying, "Retreat, or die. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 170. The words of the man in leather robe were cold, calm and powerful. But the Snowfield dire wolves didn't stop, they roared and rushed to the mountain pass again. Maybe they didn't understand, or hunger was always more terrible than fear. The collective charge of dozens of dire wolves made the frozen ground of the wilderness tremble, and the thin ice covering the mud was shattered. The momentum was extremely amazing. A leg that was harder than steel kicked out, directly shattering the claws of the giant wolf in front. Then, the second kick landed on the shoulder blade of the giant wolf. A huge force burst out from the contact between the sole of the foot and the fur, tearing up a clump of long and dirty wolf fur. The giant wolf howled miserably and rolled out, rolling a deep mark on the wilderness. It did not stop rolling until it knocked away the 2 giant wolves that were pouncing on it from behind. However, it no longer had the strength to stand up. The man in leather robe slowly took back his leg in the air, and looked at the dire wolves that were getting closer and closer. Suddenly several bloody flames burst out from his bare legs. A gust of wind rose without any warning, and he didn't bend his knees or bend his legs. His body suddenly bounced up in the air, like a stone that was shaken by the power of the earth, until it was more than 30 meters high in the sky, and then fell down at a high speed, smashing a dire wolf on the hard ground. With a loud bang, the ice gravel and the black mud splashed very high, as if there was an explosion. The man in leather robe didn't stop, and then bounced up again. But this time, he didn't face the cold sky, but the dire wolves that were attacking at high speed. He rushed into the dire wolves like a lightning, and when he had time to punch, he just punched, and when he had time to punch, he just used his body to collide with the dire wolves. He didn't even dodge the sharp claws of the dire wolves, and he didn't even bother to look at them. It seemed that he was very confident in his body strength. After all, the dire wolves were several orders of magnitude heavier than him, so the man in leather robe collided with them like a stone. Although he successfully broke the formation of the dire wolves and slowed down their speed, his body would be knocked to the ground every time he collided with them. His leather robe would be torn by the dire wolves' claws, and his animal skin would burst like flowers. After falling to the ground, the man in leather robe stood up indifferently, and once again collided with the dire wolves. Although his animal skin had been torn into many pieces and hung around his waist, there was no emotion on his face. The enormous impact force and the sharp and terrifying wolf claws drew out streaks of white marks on his steel-like skin, but they were unable to penetrate deep into his internal organs. The few bloody wounds were not even worth mentioning, unable to cause any fatal damage to him at all. Although there was a big difference in size, the strength and physical strength of the dire wolves were reversed. The fierce and powerful dire wolves of the cold region had no way to deal with such an indestructible Iron Man. The battle had just started, and didn't last for a long. The dire wolves didn't last long. In front of the entrance, there was a large empty circle. A low roar sounded, and an order was issued. The dire wolves panted heavily, formed a semicircle along the entrance, and temporarily stopped charging. They stared at the naked male human at the entrance, and their huge eyes, which were usually cruel and indifferent, finally showed the emotion of fear. Nobody knew when, but the 10 strong dire wolves that besieged Tang Xiaotang also stopped attacking, and black blood dripped from their long white hair, which looked very miserable. They stared at the red giant knife in the little girl's hand, and growled from time to time with stinky saliva dripping from their mouths. But no one dared to disobey the order of their leader, and they reluctantly made way for her with their sharp teeth. Tang Xiaotang dragged the heavy red giant knife, and panted to the direction of the mountain pass. On the way, she untied the tail on her neck, wiped the blood from her mouth and nose, and then casually inserted it into her belt. Walking to the side of the man in leather robe at the mountain pass, Tang Xiaotang turned around and stood side by side with him. They stood side by side, facing the hundreds of dire wolves that were almost driven crazy by cold and hunger. There was a slight commotion at the back of the dire wolves, and then they separated to make a way. Faintly, a bigger dire wolf slowly walked out. The fur of this dire wolf was smooth, soft and snow-white, and with its huge body, it looked as beautiful and proud as a snow mountain. But what was strange was that this huge dire wolf was extremely gentle, and its eyes were full of tranquility and obedience. When it walked, it was especially gentle, as if it was extremely afraid of stepping on something by mistake. Tang Xiaotang said with surprise, "Wow, the leader of this dire wolf is so beautiful." The man in leather robe said, "This is a female wolf. She is not the leader, but the wife of the leader." Hearing this, Tang Xiaotang was stunned. When she looked carefully, she saw an extremely shocking scene, and her body became slightly stiff. In front of that beautiful and huge dire wolf, there was a small body moving slowly. All the snowfield dire wolves that saw the small figure lowered their heads, which were usually arrogant and cruel, and put their feet on the ground to show their absolute respect and obedience. Some of the snowfield dire wolves even whimpered in fear. That small body was also a dire wolf. This wolf was actually very strong. It was half the height of a human, and it didn't walk slowly. However, it looked very small and slow in the midst of the snowfield dire wolves that were as big as hills. This was a very ordinary dire wolf. But it had a beautiful white dire wolf as its wife, and it could command such a group of horrible dire wolves. So the more ordinary the dire wolf was, the more extraordinary it was. The leader of the dire wolves was actually an ordinary male dire wolf. Even the most knowledgeable hunters in the northern tribes had never seen such a ridiculous and creepy scene. But this was the real scene. The ordinary male wolf came to the middle of the wolf pack and slowly raised his head. Looking at the pair of human men at the mountain pass, an irritable but vigilant look appeared in his eyes, as if he could perceive some kind of strange wisdom from them. After a moment of silence, the leader of the dire wolves stretched out its left paw, and gently patted the hard ground of the wilderness twice, and then let out a sharp but not aggressive howl. The man in leather robe took a step forward, stared at the eyes of the leader of the dire wolves, and slowly shook his head. The ordinary male dire wolf stretched out its right paw, and its two paws were in front of it. Its whole body slowly arched, and the gray-brown hair on its waist suddenly stood up, as if it was a ring of steel needles. It took a deep breath, and the ring of hair on its waist quickly moved forward with the movement of its body, and turned into a lion's crown on its neck. Then a horrible howl burst out. Ow! Ow! The howl of the dire wolves reverberated in the silent wilderness, and immediately caused a strong wind. The few ice and snow mixed in the cold-resistant grass and mud were shaken by the thunder-like howl, and flew all over the sky, wrapped in a large amount of invisible sharp power, like a hurricane blowing towards the entrance. After hearing the howl, all the dire wolves behind the ordinary male dire wolves suddenly lowered their bodies in fear, and trembled all over. It seemed that they wanted to bury their huge bodies into the ground of the wilderness. The largest and beautiful female dire wolf seemed to be the only one among the dire wolves that was not affected by the howl. She stood behind the ordinary male dire wolf, and covered his body with her own body. At the same time, she vigilantly stared at the dire wolves and the entrance of the mountain. It seemed that if anyone wanted to attack her husband at this time, she would instantly tear him into pieces. The howl of the dire wolves and the hurricane came together. Tang Xiaotang took a step back with her left foot, and deeply stepped into the hard ground of the wilderness. She held the heavy red broadsword in front of her eyes, and her small body kept trembling because of the wind. It seemed that she would be blown away and swallowed at any time. From time to time, some ice and branches hit the broad surface of the broadsword like arrows, making a crisp sound. The power from the wind was so strong that even if it only carried some ice, branches, and mud, it still carried a terrible power. Tang Xiaotang slightly bent her arms, buried her head, and gritted her teeth. It seemed that it was very difficult for her to do so. However, the man in the leather robe still didn't dodge, but just stood in front of the hurricane caused by the howl of the dire wolves. Standing in front of Tang Xiaotang, he blocked most of the attack for her. Those strong mud, branches, and invisible tearing power hit his naked body, making a burst of metal friction sound, and even splashing countless white air turbulence. Suddenly, the man in the leather robe took a deep breath, and his face became red as if it was burning. He took another step forward, and drew an arc with his right hand. Then he lowered his body from his waist, and punched the dire wolf from a distance of more than 30 meters. With a bang, the air wave caused by the fist tore the hurricane caused by the howl of the dire wolf, and hit the head of the dire wolf fiercely. The head of the dire wolf was tilted by the heavy punch, and blood flowed down from its white sharp teeth. Judging from its expression, it should not be seriously injured, but the howl of the dire wolf was forced to stop. The man in the leather robe took another step forward, pulled off the ragged fur hanging on his waist, and gave a wild and arrogant howl to the dire wolves close at hand. Howl. His roar didn't contain any power, but it was filled with an extremely valiant aura. It was as if he was announcing to the pack of wolves from the north that this wasteland was under his protection, and they shouldn't even think about taking a step forward. The ordinary dire wolf silently looked at the powerful male human for a long time, and then gave a low howl. With its howl, the huge dire wolves behind him silently retreated further with unwilling expressions, and the snow-capped female dire wolf who had been guarding him silently retreated to the back of the dire wolves after a moment of silence. Tang Xiaotang blankly looked at the retreating dire wolves, and subconsciously reached out her hand to wipe the small blood on her face, and curiously asked, "Are they retreating? I really don't understand why these dire wolves listen to him." The reason is actually very simple. The man in the leather robe replied, "Because he is the strongest." The snowfield dire wolves retreated hundreds of feet in a very disciplined manner, but the seemingly ordinary male wolf did not leave. It was still squatting on the ground not far from the mountain pass, silently watching Tang Xiaotang and the man in the leather robe. "What does he want to do?" Tang Xiaotang asked. The man in the leather robe did not answer, but silently looked there, as if he was waiting for something. At this moment, the huge female wolf that was as beautiful as a snowy mountain slowly walked over from the back of the pack. She walked to the side of the ordinary male wolf and meekly lowered her head. She loosened her mouth and placed a very small ball next to the male wolf. The little ball was extremely fluffy and snow-white. It looked like a snowball, and it would occasionally move. The snow-capped female direwolf gently touched the small snowball with her huge beak, and her expression was full of attachment and reluctance. The ordinary direwolf slightly turned his head to look at the female direwolf, and looked a little unhappy and agitated. But looking at the sadness in his wife's eyes, the direwolf did not do anything, but gently rubbed his wife's huge head twice, as if to express comfort. Seeing this, Tang Xiaotang knew what the direwolf wanted to do. She could not help raising her hand to cover her mouth, and her eyes were full of shock. Then she looked up at the man in the leather robe beside her. It seemed that the man in the leather robe did not expect that the ordinary direwolf would do this. After a moment of silence, he resolutely turned around and walked towards the pass without looking back. The ordinary direwolf looked at his back, and made a sad low growl. All of a sudden, a shadow covered its body. It raised its head and saw that the female human had come to its front. Judging from her expression and movements, it seemed that she had completely forgotten to be vigilant against its attack. Tang Xiaotang held the snow-like direwolf in her hands like holding a treasure, and didn't care about it at all. If the seemingly ordinary direwolf attacked her, she was very likely to be in danger. She opened her bright eyes and looked at the direwolf in front of her, and said, "Don't worry, he dares not to disobey me, so it's better to follow me than him." The ordinary direwolf stared at the direwolf in her arms, and after a moment of silence, it turned around and left the direwolf group. The snow-capped female direwolf reluctantly looked at the direwolf in her arms. Tang Xiaotang looked up at it and said, "I promise to treat it well." A deep and majestic howl sounded, and hundreds of direwolves walked towards the vast wilderness in the west. A thin direwolf could be vaguely seen on the back of the tallest snow-white female direwolf in the middle of the direwolf group. Tang Xiaotang looked at the wolves that were moving further and further away, and then looked at the corpses of the giant wolves in front of the mountain pass. She suddenly asked, "Can they find a new coniferous forest before the night comes?" The man in the leather robe glanced at the sleeping white direwolf cub in her arms, and said, "They are wolves, and we are human beings. Snow deer gnaw the bark of the coniferous forest, and they eat the flesh of snow deer. But we can gnaw the bark, eat the venison, and kill the dire wolves when necessary. Warmth is not needed to survive in the wilderness. I don't care about it, and you shouldn't care about it either." Tang Xiaotang ignored him, and held the direwolf cub in her arms tighter, and said, "Anyway, you don't need to raise it." The small wounds caused by the direwolf claws in the previous battle had already become faint white lines, and those white lines had disappeared without a trace. No trace could be found on his skin, which was as rough as steel. No one knew what kind of martial arts he had practiced, and his recovery ability was so strong. The wind and snow gradually rose, and the night was coming, and the temperature was getting lower. After confirming that the direwolf group had gone far, the two left the natural pass, and walked towards the south of the wilderness faster and faster. In front of them, there were many tribes of the northern wilderness moving south. The strong men of each tribe gathered in the south in advance to fight with the barbarians on the grassland. The old, weak, women, and children were very vulnerable to the attack of the dire wolves, and they still had to travel for a long time. Tang Xiaotang followed the man in the leather robe with the direwolf cub in her arms, and asked questions about the strange world in the south from time to time. "Are we really going to the south? I think it's good to live in the wilderness." "Tang, what is the world in the south like? You never told me." "Tang, have you been to the Tang Empire? Tang, since the Tang Empire is our enemy, and it was those people who drove us to the northern wilderness, why do we have the surname Tang? Do they want us to remember the hatred from thousands of years ago? But it's really boring. I'm really not used to living in a strange place. But I heard that there is a city in the south, and I don't know what it looks like. The man in the leather robe called Tang kept silent until he heard these words. He stopped and stood silently on the wilderness in the wind and snow. Suddenly he turned his head and looked at the little girl who was playing with the dire wolf cub. Then he remembered that she had been living with him in the wilderness since she was born, and had never seen a city. The city is very big, and there are many buildings. It's very lively and prosperous. The man in the leather robe recalled the cities in the Central Plains he saw when he was young, and explained clumsily. Tang Xiaotang looked up curiously and asked, "What is a building?" After a moment of silence, the man in the leather robe said, "It's something like a tent." Tang Xiaotang smiled cutely and said in a childish voice, "I know. A city is a big tent." The man in the leather robe suddenly felt a little depressed. He looked at the little girl quietly and said in a low voice, "It's too hard to live in the wilderness. You shouldn't live like this." Tang Xiaotang answered, "Where is it not hard? I heard that there is a good place." After a long silence, the man in the leather robe said, "There is an academy in the south of Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire." Tang Xiaotang raised her arm and gently poked the cyan talisman on his back. She said with a smile, "Didn't you say that people in the south call us the remnants of the devil's doctrine? I'm going to find my master. It's been almost 23 years. The man in the leather robe looked at her and said, "No one knows where he is hiding in the world. It may take a long time to find him. During this time, without my protection, I have to find a way to put you in a safe place. Isn't it safe to stay in the tribe?" Tang Xiaotang asked. The man in the leather robe shook his head and said, "Since we are going to the south, we should fight with the barbarians on the grassland first. Eventually, we will alarm those people in the Central Plains." Tang Xiaotang thought of the strange Central Plains and the academy in Chang and that she had heard of several times. She couldn't help feeling a little confused. Looking at her expression, the man in the leather robe said, "The world treats people harshly and ruthlessly, but we can still survive. This shows that only people are the most powerful existence in the world. You don't have to be afraid of anything." "I understand." Tang Xiaotang looked up at him and said, "Whether I can enter the academy or not, I will live well." The man in the leather robe said, "Before I find my master, I have to kill someone." "Who?" "A general of the Tang Empire called Xiaoho." "His surname is Xiaoho?" "No, his name is Xiaoho." "I understand, just like you." "Yes, my surname is not Tang. My name is Tang." Looking at the snow wolf cub in her arms, Tang Xiaotang suddenly thought of something. She raised her fresh and lovely face and opened her bright eyes. She asked, "I have a question that I don't understand. The size difference between the male wolf and his wife is so big. How can they give birth to a child?" The man in the leather robe looked a little stiff. After a while, he replied, "I am your brother. You should ask your husband about this question." The wind and snow started again. It was very cold in the wilderness, and the conversation between the brother and sister was even colder. In the southern suburb of Chang'an, on the stone path in the back mountain of the academy. People's emotional needs always vaguely point to their most regrettable parts. So it is very understandable that you, a timid fat man, want to find a fresh, cute, small and strong little girl. Ning Ke looked at Chen Pippi and said seriously, "But I think you should lose weight. Otherwise, which girl can bear your 200 or 300 pounds of fat? The big difference in size is a problem after all." Chen Pippi ignored the sarcasm in his words. He broke off a branch and waved it like a child. He said, "So I just added a condition. That little girl must be strong. A woman painstakingly cultivates to be strong just to meet the condition of being suppressed by you. Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head helplessly. He said, I guess if there is such a person, she will be suppressed by you, and you will be suppressed by her every day. You will never be able to stand up for the rest of your life. Chen Pippi smiled proudly and said, yes, she is strong. But is there any woman stronger than me in this world? Even if there is, it will be those old women hiding in the deep mountains. I can't be blind to find them. Ning Ke suddenly asked with a smile, how about the woman from West Hill? Don't hit my face. Chen Pippi rubbed his chubby cheeks and said angrily, if we really fight, how can that crazy woman be my opponent? I just don't want her brother to respect her brother, so I can't do it. Ning Ke said sincerely, I wish that the girl you like in the future will have the fiercest brother in the world. Chen Pippi said sarcastically, I am a peerless cultivation genius. There are only a few people who are stronger than me in the younger generation. The two senior brothers, the senior brother from West Hill, a mute, and a guy named Tang who is similar to the mute. Eldest brother and second brother don't have sisters. Do you think I will be so stupid to choose the sisters of the remaining 3 people to like? Ning Ke sincerely reminded him, don't be too sure. Otherwise, how will you cry when that day comes? Don't laugh at me. Speaking of which, what kind of woman do you like? Like Sang Sang? Is Sang Sang a woman? Ning Ke shook his head and said with a smile, woman. You might as well raise a dog. Chen Pippi said, I will not tell 7th sister about this. Ning Ke said seriously, a bowl of crab porridge. Chen Pippi stopped threatening and thought of the previous topic. He shook his head and said, dogs are for eating, not for raising. Ning Ke's thoughts went back to a long time ago, as if he saw the snow-white dog in the flower bed. After a long silence, he shook his head and said, I just want to raise a Samoyed in my life, and then I will name it Little White. Of course I wrote this with my heart. If you can see my painstaking efforts and interest in correcting the wrong words and sentences in 4 chapters, please vote for me for free. I have been too quiet these days, which is not a good thing. I bow and thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Don't tell me you want to cultivate the devil's sex techniques. With the number of opened apertures in my snow mountain and ocean of chi, no matter how high my comprehension is and how hard I cultivate, if I continue to cultivate step by step, I will never be able to catch up with true geniuses like you. Ning Ke looked at him and replied, you and those world wayfarers have already entered the knowing destiny state. In front of you, I'm just an ant. In fact, if Prince Long Qing wants to kill me, he only needs to move his little finger and I won't be able to resist. I don't like this feeling at all. I want to catch up to you as soon as possible, and even surpass you. A man's strength is limited, and the way of heaven has its own rules. Chen Pippi looked at him seriously and said, cultivation is a gift given by Haotian to human beings. There has always been only one path, and you have to persist on this path to know whether you can go through it or not. If you think that the road ahead is long and want to take a shortcut, then the final result will only be falling into the abyss. Ning Ke still wanted to say something. Chen Pippi shook his head, and his chubby face showed a serious and cautious expression that was completely different from his usual expression. He looked at Ning Ke and said in a low voice, you've already entered the devil's way of thinking just now. If you don't change this wrong idea immediately, you will definitely burn your internal organs and eventually die of qi deviation. By then, how can you walk the world? You can only welcome death. Ning Ke thought of what Liu Qingchen said during the journey last year. After a moment of silence, he said, I know that only 1 out of 100 people who cultivate the devil's doctrine can survive in the end, but, there are still people who can survive, and they are very powerful. You just said that the successor of the devil's doctrine surnamed Tang, even your senior brother Westhill dare not say that he can defeat him. The key is not whether he can succeed or not, but whether this path is correct or not. The people of the devil's doctrine go against heaven and earth, forcibly absorbing the heaven and earth into their bodies, and vainly try to replace Haotian with human bodies to control the rules. And in order to make their flesh and blood strong enough to absorb the chi of heaven and earth, they have tried countless evil means, and even some devil's doctrine schools live by eating people. Like these evil sects, their bodies are already inhuman, and their thoughts are even more inhuman. Cultivating the devil's doctrine means cultivating the inhuman. Chen Pipi's expression was not as casual and natural as usual. He stared at Ning Kei's eyes and said coldly, "Ning Kei, I have to warn you, if I know that you have contacted the devil's doctrine, I will not just watch you explode and die, I will directly kill you." The devil's doctrine lived by eating people, or did they use this method to stimulate the spirit? If eating people is to be possessed by the devil, then the world is full of people who cultivate the devil's doctrine. Ning Kei thought of the countless scenes he had seen during the great drought in the north, and the many scenes he did not want to recall when he was struggling to move forward at the foot of Min Mountain. His expression became a little stiff. After the devil's doctrine was defeated by the righteous, they sneaked into the wilderness. Now there are very few sects left in the Central Plains, and I believe that no one dares to eat people. Maybe some sects choose a more normal method of body cultivation. After a moment of silence, he said, "If the cultivation methods of those devil's doctrine schools do not harm the innocent, then why can't we try? The Academy stresses openness and tolerance, why do you still care so much about the difference between the devil's doctrine and the devil's doctrine?" Chen Pipi shook his head and said seriously, "Even if those people in the devil's doctrine do not harm the innocent, they will also hurt themselves. The cultivation method that uses life as a bet is not a gift from Haotian, but more like they want to steal the light of Haotian. Even if there is no problem with the cultivation method of the devil's doctrine, this idea itself is wrong, and it will only turn people into inhumans." Ning Kei asked thoughtfully, how to distinguish right from wrong? How to distinguish between human and inhuman? Chen Pipi looked into his eyes and said seriously, "People living in the world must know how to respect." Ning Kei officially stepped on the road of cultivation and was proud of his success. Less than half a day later, he suddenly found a few higher peaks in the distance. Those peaks stood silently in the clouds, extremely high and steep. It seemed that he would never be able to climb them with his talent, so he inevitably felt a little sad. Besides feeling sad and lost, there was even some despair that he did not dare to say out. His snow mountain and ocean of chi had opened 10 acupoints, and he could barely cultivate. How could he be compared with those successors of various sects who had entered the knowing destiny state at a young age? If he could not cultivate in the past, it would be fine, because they were originally people of two different worlds. However, now that he was in the same world with those real powerhouses, he clearly realized how big the gap was. How could he shorten the gap in the shortest time? How could the snow mountain and ocean of chi with only 10 acupoints open no longer become an obstacle to cultivation? In order to enter the back of the mountain of the Academy, he, who confidently asked Chen Pipi to open the back door, naturally began to think of shortcuts or unorthodox methods. He had never met anyone from the Diabolism, except for the great sword master who played with broken fingers at the North Mountain Pass. He had not read any Diabolism cultivation manual, but only heard some introductions from Liu Qingchen on the journey. And it was these brief introductions that made him vaguely realize the possibility of success. Unfortunately, Liu Qingchen and Chen Pipi's serious and even cold attitude made him clearly realize that if he did not want to become Ling Hu Chong, who was chased by the Five Mountain Sword sect, he had better not try this way. It would be good if he could become Ling Hu Chong, but the problem was that Ling Hu Chong had Ren Yingying, the saintess of the Diabolism, as his wife, and Ren Wuxing, the hierarch of the Diabolism, as his father-in-law. It would be a pleasure for him to cultivate the Diabolism divine skill through nepotism. But what did he have? He only had a little black handmaiden, and his best friend was the righteous of the righteous. Before Haotian's divine light and the righteous of the academy, Ning Ke finally realized that the devil's doctrine, which had already weakened, was really useless in this world. The difference between righteous and evil was like the Eiffel Tower in Paris, which was meaningless. The drama of the devil's land of peach blossom would eventually lead to a tragedy, and he had long made up his mind not to let his life become a tragedy. The devil's doctrine was now like a rat crossing the street, which everyone wanted to kill. Ning Ke believed that if others knew that he had once been interested in the devil's doctrine's cultivation method, he would definitely face a very miserable end. But Chen Pipi would not go so far as to sell him out. As his best friend, the fat man would not be like the law enforcement team of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace, who would subconsciously set up the fire execution platform upon hearing the word devil. Even if the person who was tied to the fire execution platform was a poor guy who could change magic, it was still an academic discussion after all. Why should he be so serious? Thinking about these trivial things, Ning Ke went down the back of the mountain, and did not notice the strange looks from his former classmates in the study room. He walked out of the academy in a daze. Beside the meadow outside the academy, there were 2 horse carriages quietly waiting for him. Old Duan was sitting on the shaft of one of the carriages. The other carriage was also black. It was unknown what kind of wood the carriage was made of, but it looked extremely hard and thick. There were all kinds of complicated decorations on the carriage board, and the horse lowered its head and swayed gently in front of it, looking extremely bored. Ning Ke guessed who the owner of the carriage was. He said a few words to old Duan and asked him to take the carriage back to the city first. Then he tidied up his clothes and walked to the front of the black carriage. He bowed with hands folded in front and said, "Greetings, master." The curtain of the carriage was pulled up by an old hand. Master Yen Sei showed his head and yawned. He looked at Ning Ke and said angrily, "You promised to follow me in the afternoon. What time is it now? No matter how high the academy is, you are just in a no-doubt state. The headmaster of the academy hasn't come back yet. What can you learn? Why did you stay in there for such a long time? Did you lie on the grass and take a nap?" Ning Ke was shocked and thought that even this was seen through by him. Could it be that the divine talisman master could also tell fortunes? "I don't want to pretend to be sad. Let me explain. My cervical vertebra is really not good recently. It's hard for me to write these 2 days. I will do it again next week when I feel better. Besides, I changed a little bit at the last part. I thought so when I wrote it, but it disappeared inexplicably when I wrote it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 172. The black horse carriage was running very fast on the official road, and the spring trees and green fields outside the window were almost pulled into pure green blocks. Ning Ke looked at the scenery outside the window with mixed feelings. He had just seen the proud goose and the strange man in the back of the mountain of the academy, and now a new and mysterious world was about to open its curtain to him. It was really too much for his eyes to take in. Ning Ke didn't know more about the most mysterious talisman Taoism in the legend except that he saw an old Taoist burning a talisman outside a Taoist temple in Chang'an City. But sitting in the carriage made of stainless steel, which should be extremely heavy, he vaguely felt that he was already in the world of talisman Taoism. No matter how fast the carriage was running, the people in the carriage didn't feel the slightest bump, and the lonely horse in front of the soft rope couldn't carry such a heavy load. Yen Sei looked at his expression and said, "You seem to be thinking about something." Ning Ke turned around and looked at the dirty old Taoist. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "I'm thinking about what talisman is engraved on the carriage. It can actually reduce the weight, just like magic." He didn't ask whether the carriage was engraved with talisman, but directly asked what talisman was engraved. This answer made Master Yen Sei quite satisfied, but the last word made him extremely unhappy. He frowned and said, "Talisman Taoism is Talisman Taoism. What does it have to do with devil's doctrine?" Ning Ke just subconsciously classified this magical means beyond his daily experience as magic. He didn't know how harsh the word devil's doctrine was to the minister of offerings of South School of Haotian Taoism. The soft and joyful hoofbeats gradually slowed down, and the black carriage made of stainless steel stopped on the official road in the southern suburbs of Chang'an City. Master Yen Sei led Ning Ke down the carriage. He glanced at the pavilion beside the official road not far away and the thin poplar trees outside the pavilion. He turned back and said to Ning Ke, "Since you know there is talisman engraved on the carriage, try to feel it." Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He walked to the side of the carriage and carefully looked at the black carriage board. He looked very carefully and confirmed that the carriage board was indeed made of stainless steel. Those complicated decorations were deeply engraved into the steel by some kind of sharp blade, and then painted with a kind of glossy paint, so it looked extraordinarily beautiful and somewhat mysterious. The patterns were so complicated that they violated the principles of aesthetics. He looked at it for a very long time, yet was unable to find anything strange about it. A judgment gradually arose in his heart. The talisman markings that were truly effective shouldn't be this complicated. Those complicated lines that looked like branches and vines might be a smokescreen used to conceal the true talisman markings. He had read a few books on talisman Taoism in the old library, but those books were only introductions and did not have any objective understanding of talisman patterns. It was basically impossible to find the effective talisman pattern from such complicated patterns. However, since Master Yen Sei wanted him to feel it, it should be a kind of assessment. After pondering for a moment, he slowly closed his eyes, raised his arm, and used his fingertips to gently brush over the runes that were deeply embedded into the steel. Suddenly, he furrowed his brows. When he opened his eyes to look, there was nothing strange about the complicated decorations on the carriage. But now, when he closed his eyes and used his psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth, he found that there was a layer on his fingertips. The layer was very thin, like an invisible membrane between his fingertips and the carriage. With a slight distraction of his psyche power, the membrane that he sensed disappeared instantly. Ning Ke was silent for a moment and entered the meditative state that he was best at. He began to use his psyche power to sense the slightest changes of the chi of heaven and earth. As expected, the invisible membrane appeared again between his fingertips and the carriage. This time, he was more prepared and his perception was more delicate. He could clearly feel that the membrane was flowing slowly. Master Yen Sei's voice rang in his ears, "What do you feel?" Ning Ke carefully sensed it. After a long silence, he seriously replied, "A very light flow of the chi of heaven and earth." Master Yen Sei continued to ask, "What kind of flow? What is it like?" Ning Ke calmly replied, "Like water, but lighter than water, more empty. More like wind, but it can't be wind." Master Yen Sei looked at Ning Ke beside the carriage. He slowly frowned and asked, "Why can't it be wind?" After a moment of silence, Ning Ke replied, "Because, the flow of the primordial chi on the talisman pattern is too regular, as if it goes in a fixed route, like in a complete system. But the wind is the flow of air, so it should not be regular." Master Yen Sei's tightly frowned eyebrows gradually relaxed. He looked at Ning Ke's back with his eyes shining brightly. It seemed that he was praising Ning Ke and also marveling at him. Because Ning Ke's performance at this moment had far exceeded his best imagination. Ning Ke's fingers left the carriage. He looked back at Yen Sei and said unconfidently, "Master, I just said it based on my feeling." Feeling is the most important qualification for practicing talisman Taoism. Master Yen Sei gently stroked the sparse beard on his chin and lovingly looked at him. His laughter was hoarse and weird, like an old farmer who dug out antiques in his backyard. He said, "You are very sensitive, more sensitive than I thought." The blood vessels of beasts are talismans. The trace of water flowing is talisman. The trace of wind blowing is talisman. The crack on the dry earth is talisman. The cloud in the blue sky is also talisman. It was a very simple and clear statement. Ning Ke was shocked and speechless for a long time. According to Master Yen Sei, all traces in the world were talismans. This idea had completely exceeded his realm of thinking. After a long silence, he asked, "Master, is drawing talisman imitating all traces in nature?" Master Yen Sei was slightly stunned. He looked at him and said with a smile, "That's a painter, not a talisman master." A few green leaves were blown off the branches by the wind on the side of the road, but before they fell into the slightly wet field, they were picked up by a gust of wind and gently floated to the top of the pavilion. They fell on the tiles that had been washed dark by the rain, and made a few light popping sounds. The blood vessels of beasts are talismans. This kind of talisman can only maintain their survival. The trace of water flowing is talisman. This kind of talisman can only make them go from high to low according to the decree of Haotian. The veins among the dead leaves are talisman. This kind of talisman can only make them pour the nutrients and water absorbed by their roots into the leaves as they have done for hundreds of millions of years. Master Yen Sei calmly said, "These talismans are all natural talismans. They are born in nature and wither in nature. They coexist with the chi of heaven and earth, just like the truth that each of us lives in this world." However, whether human beings cultivate or study talisman Taoism, they have already exceeded the original mission of human beings in the world. That is to say, it has exceeded the need of survival. Therefore, the real meaning of talisman Taoism must come from nature, but must be higher than nature. Ning Ke listened silently. He faintly felt that although the master was talking about talisman Taoism, it contained a lot of great truths. Master Yen Sei drank up the remaining tea in the cup, looked at him and continued to say, "The talismans that come from nature but are higher than nature must go through several processes: copying, understanding, induction, simplification, purification, and interest. The so-called talismans are the lines and traces that human beings have learned and extracted from the talismans of nature for countless years." Ning Ke filled the teacup for the master and sat back to ask, "Then what is Tao?" "Tao is to know. Let who know? Let the chi of heaven and earth know." Ning Ke was stunned and asked confusedly, "Let the chi of heaven and earth know what?" Master Yen Sei looked at him with a smile and said, "Let the chi of heaven and earth know what we want to do. All the means of human cultivation are inseparable from the control of the chi of heaven and earth. Controlling the chi of heaven and earth with swordsmanship and controlling the flying sword by psyche power is too indirect after all. Although the psyche master directly controls the chi of heaven and earth to attack the enemy, it is too simple and can only attack the opponent's sense of perception. Only talisman Taoism is between the two, but its state is higher than the two, because the ultimate goal of talisman Taoism is to tell the chi of heaven and earth what you want to do, and then the chi of heaven and earth will help you do it. The chi of heaven and earth has no eyes and ears, so it can never know what kind of strange ideas you have in your sense of perception. It is even more impossible for it to know that you want to condense the rain into thousands of sharp invisible knives, so how can you let it know what you mean? Talisman is the bridge between the human psyche power and the chi of heaven and earth. The talisman master condenses the chi of heaven and earth into these lines and traces with psyche power. Once it is stimulated, it can resonate with the surrounding chi of heaven and earth, and then it can make the wind rise, the water move, the clouds appear and disappear, and the sky dry. Ning Ke vaguely grasped the key of the problem. Master Yen Sei looked at the expression on his face and asked, "You seem to understand something. I once heard from a friend that the ocean of chi and mountain of snow in the human body is like a musical instrument, and the psyche power is the air. Only when it is blown into the instrument can it become a beautiful music, and then the chi of heaven and earth can understand it and resonate with it." Ning Ke looked at Master Yen Sei and said, "According to your previous explanation, I think that since talisman Taoism uses Fu to tell the Qi of heaven and earth what you want to do, can it be said that Fu is equivalent to the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow in our body? Your friend's state is very high, and his explanation is very clever. Master Yen Sei looked at him with a smile and said, "Of course, you are also worth teaching. The acupoints of the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow in your body are too few, so it is very troublesome to cultivate swordsmanship or other things. But talisman Taoism is different. As long as you can perceive the Qi of heaven and earth, you can perceive the subtle differences between them, and then record them with Fu and resonate with them, you can succeed." Ning Ke asked with confusion, since the talisman master has been learning and recording the talisman of nature for thousands of years, is there no ready-made Fu? If there are the current Fu, can I cultivate talisman Taoism without perceiving the fluctuation of the Qi of heaven and earth? Master Yen Sei laughed, gently stroked his beard and asked, "Are there two identical leaves in the world?" Ning Ke thought that if he asked about eggs, he would really doubt whether he was Da Vinci or not, so he answered, "No." Then is it possible for there to be two identical people in the world? Of course not. In this case, you can't be me, and your psyche power can't be the same as mine. Then why can the Qi of heaven and earth know that they are the same when you write the same Fu? Ning Ke didn't understand at all. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said calmly, "For talisman master, our psyche power is like countless different words, and the so-called Fu is the combination of these words. The problem is that I am from Chang and who speaks the official language, while you are from the South Sea who speaks the Fire Lu language. We put our words into the same combination, so it is absolutely impossible for us to write the same article. There may be only dozens of languages in the world, but the psyche power of each talisman master is a completely different language. I made a Fu of 4-6, and the Qi of heaven and earth can hear the impassioned words in it. You also made a Fu of 4-6, and the Qi of heaven and earth can read it, but the Qi of heaven and earth is at a loss, wondering why this guy's words are so incoherent and what does he want to say." Ning Ke understood and bowed deeply to Master Yen Sei, expressing his gratitude. There were settings in my previous novels, but the worldview was very crude. If I could avoid it, I would avoid it. I didn't avoid it in this Showa from the beginning. I think it's very courageous and bold to do so, and I firmly believe that this illusory world is self-justifying. Just like today's chapter, maybe it is only 4,000 words in your eyes, but such 4,000 words are much more difficult to write than the 10,000 words when I was climbing the mountain. I am proud of myself when I write it. I know many people don't like to see me being narcissistic and long-winded, so don't look at me. I can't suppress my pride. Except for a few days of self-doubt every month, for most of my life, I always feel that I am great at writing novels and making up stories, but I don't like to cast pearls before swine. Since I am such a bright big white pig, I am very afraid that you can't see my whiteness, my fatness, and my goodness, so I can't help but often jump out to remind you of my greatness. Finally, I want to flatter you. You like to read my novels and make up stories, which shows that your appreciation ability is also very great. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation or monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. But if you look into the future, you will know that this mountain is infinitely high. Master Yen Sei looked at him and sighed, "It's too difficult for talisman Taoism to appear." The word difficult can't describe the inheritance of talisman Taoism until today. It's like a tragic and stirring scene of a man guarding the pass. That's why I'm so excited when I find that you have potential. Since you are lucky to have this potential, you must cherish it, not only for yourself, but also for talisman Taoism itself. Ning Ke heard the endless sorrow of vicissitudes, and his body became slightly stiff, as if he saw those pictures in countless years. In ancient times, a tribal wizard in animal skin came to a cliff cave to rest after presiding over a sacrificial ceremony. The tribal wizard sang an obscure song and picked up a red stone to draw a picture on the wall of the cave. The wizard wanted to describe that the fire was very good, very beautiful, and very red today. But he didn't expect that the painting was only half finished, and then it burned on the wall of the cave. The wizard screamed and fell to the ground in embarrassment. He kept kowtowing to the burning picture, and the animal skin on his buttocks kept trembling because of fear. The people in the tribe heard the wizard scream and rushed into the cliff cave. Then they also saw the burning picture, and knelt on the ground in fear, crying and shouting, thinking that it was some kind of evil worship. The wizard was the wisest person in the tribe. After he calmed down, he drove everyone out of the cliff cave. The burning picture gradually went out, and he looked at the remaining black marks on the wall of the cave. After hesitating for a long time, he nervously stretched out his fingers to touch it. Gradually his eyes brightened, and he turned around to find the red stone in the cave and tried to draw the picture again with trembling hands. After that day, the wizard could no longer draw the burning picture, but he had become the greatest wizard around the plateau. Countless people died in the war between the Central Plains and the wilderness. Blood soaked the black wilderness, soaking the grass and mud into something like chili. A practitioner from Min Mountain silently squatted in the wilderness, looking at the body of his brother in front of him. He held a branch in his hand, and drew on the blood and mud unconsciously. Not far behind him, the black and red wilderness seemed to come alive. It kept arching up and then scattered. Countless earthworms and insects panicked and scattered, as if there was a big mutated earthworm underneath. A disciple held the original Fu character left by his teacher, and kept copying on the yellow paper. He copied it from a teenager to an old man, until his hair turned white. The yellow paper behind him filled the whole room, and cobwebs formed on the beams. He kept copying. Chapter 174. The senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain of the academy were either from isolated islands in the South Sea or other countries, or their families were far away. None of them were from Chang'an. After seeing second brother's fresh and pleasant little attendant, Ning Ke once thought of taking Sang Sang to live in the back mountain. However, he thought that he was just a newcomer in the academy and was not qualified to be compared with second brother. If he made such a request when he just entered the back mountain, it would make others feel that he was too arrogant. Secondly, the back mountain was beautiful but lacked the market atmosphere. Therefore, he became the only day student in the back mountain of the academy. Sang Sang hurriedly went to the west lane to buy a lot of brushes, ink and strange materials according to the list he made. Then she began to cook and reported to him the business situation of the old brush pen shop today while cutting vegetables. Business is very good today, especially in the morning. The doorsill was almost trampled. Didn't I repair the door yesterday? But it was not strong enough, and today it was squeezed a little. After confirming that you are not at home, the number of customers decreased in the afternoon. Sang Sang suddenly thought of something. She wiped her wet hands on her apron and went back to the inner room to take out a thick stack of name cards and invitations. She put them on the desk and said, "A lot of people left these things and invited you to come to the mansion for a gathering. Because there were too many people and the names were written on the cards, I didn't write them down." Ning Ke glanced at the invitations and name cards, and then looked at the classics of Talisman which were as high as a hill. He thought that he was already very busy at this time, how could he have time to attend these appointments? After thinking for a while, he said to Sang Sang, "After dinner, you can choose these invitations and put the important ones aside to be dealt with later." "How? How to deal with them?" Sang Sang asked seriously. As Ning Ke's little handmaiden, she had never had the experience of dealing with these big shots of the empire and did not know which invitations were important. "Choose them like vegetables. Keep the fresh and expensive ones, and put aside the stale and cheap ones." "As for what is fresh and expensive?" I have told you about the official system of the empire before. Do you still remember? Anything with a high official position is expensive. Let me handle it. I'll write a reply first to show my courtesy. I think those officials only want my words. Hearing his answer, Sang Sang frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Young master, your words can be sold for money now. Isn't it a pity to write a reply and send it back?" Ning Ke smiled and continued to concentrate on reciting what he saw in front of him. His movements were gentle and calm, but in fact, he was making the psyche power in his sense of perception slowly cross the snow mountain and ocean of qi, pass through the paper window, and fall into the well in the small courtyard according to Master Yen Sei's teaching. He was carefully experiencing the primordial qi of water. He picked up the writing brush and took out the inkstone, but his wrist was stiff above the inkstone and he couldn't put the paper down. Ning Ke slightly frowned and looked at the 6 ink lines on the book again. He forcibly disassembled them in his sense of perception with the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. He only felt that the 6 ink lines suddenly separated and then quickly drifted away, turning into a dark rain cloud and shrouding his head. However, he didn't know why the dark rain cloud refused to drop a drop of water. His wrist slightly trembling, Ning Ke was ready to pick up the writing brush and put the paper down, but he finally stopped. He clearly felt that although he felt the well water and the meaning contained in the talisman, he still couldn't write his own talisman. He couldn't connect his own feeling with the water in the well. It was wrong after all. In the dead of night, the candlelight was gradually lit. There were 2 bowls of vegetables and a bowl of white rice on the desk. A bowl of water under the lamp was gently swaying in the night wind. Ning Ke stood by the window and the desk, looking at the talisman on the water scroll. His body was stiff and his right hand holding the writing brush trembled slightly. He had been in this position for a long time, but the writing brush in his hand still couldn't fall on the paper. Sang Sang sat by the bed and embroidered shoes. She looked up at him from time to time. She had already eaten a few hours ago, but she didn't ask Ning Ke to eat, because she knew that Ning Ke was in big trouble at this time. She knew that Ning Ke had started to work hard out of habit. Although she was worried, she was used to it, so she kept silent. Ning Ke had a very good but also very bad quality. Every time he encountered a problem that he was interested in and wanted to solve, he would put all his attention into the process of solving the problem. He couldn't sleep at all before he solved the problem. No matter how delicious the food was, it was as hard to chew as a candle in his mouth. He felt that the world around him didn't exist at all. In that world, he was regarded as a genius largely because he had the spirit to solve problems. However, this spirit was often a very troublesome thing for the people around him. Because he would forget to eat, he would not be able to sleep, he would torment his body until it was extremely weak, and even his life would be in danger. He would only wake up when he finally solved the problem, or when he regained his rationality and confirmed that the problem was beyond his ability. Sang Sang nodded. When he arrived at the academy, classes had already started in the study rooms. Ning Ke walked alone to the old library according to the route he took yesterday. He took a deep breath and walked into the fog in front of the mountain road. When he came out of the fog, it was still the clear morning light and the beautiful scenery of the cliff plateau. On the horse carriage from Chang and to the academy, Ning Ke closed his eyes and rested all the way. He felt a little better and looked at the beautiful scenery. He held the book in his sleeve tightly and confidently thought that he could lie on the lawn for a while and then continue to read. The academy's back mountain was a wonderful place, which might be helpful for him to comprehend talisman Taoism. When he was about to step forward, he suddenly heard a clear and beautiful voice beside him. "Youngest brother. Ah, you come at the right time." Ning Ke turned his head and looked at 7th sister in the light yellow spring clothes of the academy. He hurriedly bowed respectfully and said, "7th sister." 7th sister looked at his eyebrows and eyes curiously and asked with concern, "Why do you look so tired?" The biggest difference between a senior sister and a senior brother was that the senior sister was definitely a woman, and seventh sister was a very young and beautiful woman. No matter how old a man was, he would never admit that he was tired in front of a young and beautiful woman. So Ning Ke answered with a smile, I entered the academy's back mountain yesterday and was a little excited, so I didn't sleep well. Oh, then I don't need to worry about anything. Seventh sister took out a note from her sleeve and handed it to him. She said with a smile, you know I'm responsible for the maintenance of the tactical array in the fog. This month is the day for major repairs and we need a lot of materials. So please go to the front yard to get some materials. You can go directly to Professor Wenlon. Ning Ke slightly opened his mouth and began to regret his answer when he thought of Chen Pipi's proud laughter yesterday. He answered with a bitter face, yes, seventh sister. Hurry up. Seventh sister smiled and said with some embarrassment, there are some materials for the cloth in the array that need to be changed later. Youngest brother, please do it. Ning Ke opened his mouth wider and pointed at the thick fog behind him helplessly. He said, senior sister, do you mean I have to go into the fog to help you change the materials later? My eyesight is not good in the fog. Seventh sister covered her sleeves and smiled like a weak woman. She patted his chest heavily like a reckless man and said, since I need your help, how can I let you be a blind man? I have to check the situation in the array pivot and can't go by myself. I have to trouble you. I don't deserve to be called trouble. Youngest brother, it's great that you are here. Come here quickly. A man with dirty hair and beard waved his hand tiredly and said. Ning Ke did not know whether he was fifth brother or eighth brother. Ning Ke walked over and found that the stone table was engraved with dense straight lines, which turned into a stone chessboard. There were dozens of black and white chess pieces on the chessboard, some in the east and some in the west. He could not see what was going on. At this moment, he was suddenly shocked. He looked down and saw that one of the senior brothers had put his hand into his arms. Senior brother, I'm your eighth brother. Eighth brother, why do you put your hand into my arms? Eighth brother took back his trembling hand and asked in confusion, youngest brother, why don't you have any food with you? Ning Ke was speechless and thought, are you two children asking for candy every time you see someone? Youngest brother, no, 12th, he came to us the night before yesterday and told us that from now on, you are responsible for sending us meals. So he did not send us meals yesterday, and you did not come either. Eighth brother looked at him pitifully and said in a trembling voice, youngest brother, we have not eaten for 2 days and 2 nights. Why didn't you bring us any food today? Ning Ke opened his mouth wide but could not say a word. He thought, I have not slept for 2 days and 2 nights. Do I have to be responsible for your food? Although this was what he was thinking, looking at the 2 senior brothers beside the stone puppet with messy hair and hungry eyes, he felt like he was looking at 2 pitiful birds waiting to be fed. He really couldn't bring himself to do it, so he sighed and said, then I'll go find food for you. Fifth brother, who had been silent and only expressed his yearning for food with his eyes, suddenly became spirited when he heard that there would be food soon and they would not starve to death. He stroked his long beard and said seriously, hey, don't worry. You won't starve to death if you don't eat for a day. Eighth brother stretched out 3 fingers in front of fifth brother and said in a trembling voice, you idiot, we have not eaten for 3 days. Fifth brother looked at Ning Ke and said seriously as if he did not see the 3 fingers in front of him, next game, you first. Eighth brother took back his fingers and nodded in agreement, good, good. This is serious. Ning Ke looked at the 2 senior brothers who were about to become hungry ghosts and thought speechlessly that they deserved to starve to death. On the 3rd day, when Ning Ke left the old brush pen temple on Lin 47th Street, the paper on the desk was still as white and clean as the first snow, without any ink stains. Because he is anxious, I am anxious, and the world seems to be anxious too. Master Yen Sei looked up at the northern sky outside the southern gate temple and said slowly, 10 years to become a divine talisman master. My student's ambition is more than that, and so am I. Since the world has begun to be turbulent, I think it will be difficult to leave a stable and conservative cultivation environment for Ning Quebec. Most importantly, I have recently found that time is running out. Li Qingshan looked at Master Yen Sei's old face. After a long time of silence, he said sadly, I see. Looking at Master Yen Sei's old back, Li Qingshan suddenly said, Senior brother, don't go to play these days. Stay in the temple and talk with me. We have been in the same school for decades, but we haven't even played a game of chess. Master Yen Sei did not look back. He smiled and waved his hand. He said in a hoarse voice, You are not a young and beautiful girl. It is really boring to talk and play chess with you. Don't worry, I will come back to see you for the last time when I die. Master Yen Sei did not look back. He smiled and waved his hand. He said in a hoarse voice, You are not a young and beautiful girl. It is really boring to talk and play chess with you. Don't worry, I will come back to see you for the last time when I die. Li Qingshan withdrew his gaze and looked at the small teapot on the stove beside the table that spurted out steam. He was speechless. He thought, Senior brother, since you've decided on making a stove to boil tea, all I can do is think of some ways to help this little guy. After Master Yen Sei left South School Temple of Haotian Taoism, he went directly to the House of Red Sleeves and came to the small courtyard that he was most familiar with. Dewdrop was counting the silver notes with her maidservant at this time. They really made a small fortune by selling the rubbing of chicken soup calligraphy these days. Suddenly they heard the sound of the door and saw the dirty old Taoist standing at the gate of the courtyard. She immediately got up in surprise. In the past, she only thought this old Taoist looked wretched and generous, so she treated him patiently. Now she already knew his real identity. She did not dare to act coquettishly and hurried to greet him as fast as she could. Master Taoist is here. Dewdrop squatted and bowed, which was very respectful. She thought she should be more enthusiastic, but she was really nervous because this old Taoist was a legendary immortal. Master Yen Sei laughed strangely and pinched her plump waist. He said, You know my identity, but you don't need to be so nervous. After all, I still have to pay, so I should please you. Dewdrop took the opportunity to snuggle into his arms and said shyly, Master Taoist, you are making fun of me again. I thought you are a free man, and immortals will not stay in the mortal world for too long. I am afraid that I will never see you again. I am full of regret. Master Yen Sei said angrily, Your cosmetics here taste better than the ink on the fu paper. How can I not come here? After a few steps to the cliff, they saw a cliff cave about dozens of meters high. Birds were flying in and out of the cave quickly. On the gentle slope outside the cliff cave, there was a 2-story wooden building. The surface of the building was mottled by wind and rain and bird droppings. No one knew how many years it had been standing under the cliff. Ning Kei smelled a familiar smell when he was still some distance away from the building. He asked with a pale face, Do you smell it here? Chen Pippi sniffled and said blankly, What smell? You can't smell such a strong smell. Ning Kei stared at his eyes and said in a trembling voice, The smell of Huangzhou bud paper and ink makes me want to vomit. Why do you bring me here? Chen Pippi knew that there must be paper and ink beside the old scholar in the building, but he did not smell the smell of paper and ink that made Ning Kei pale and nauseous. He reached out his hand in front of his nose and thought that this lad had been studying talisman Taoism so crazily that he was so sensitive. Ning Kei raised his sleeves to cover his nose and followed him to the wooden building. The closer they were to the wooden building, the stronger the smell of paper and ink was, which made him more and more uncomfortable. Recently, he had been grinding ink and reading paper every night, but he could not move a stroke. Subconsciously, he had a great fear and disgust for this smell. There was an open-air stone platform under the wooden building, on which there was a huge desk, on which there were piles of books. Behind the mountainous books, sat an old scholar with grey hair. The old scholar held an old book in his left hand and a half-bald writing brush in his right hand. From time to time, he recited a few sentences to the old book and wrote some numbers on the paper. Then he continued to read. No one knew what he saw, but his long eyebrows flew up in the wind, and his facial expressions were extremely wonderful, as if he was about to dance. The old man read and copied the book, concentrating on nothing else. Whether it was the flock of birds above the cliff cave or Chin Pippi and Ning Kei who were approaching, they did not affect him at all. It seemed that as long as he started to read, the whole world except for the book would disappear in an instant. Wonderful! Wonderful! The old scholar found another wonderful place in the scroll. Using his fastest speed, he copied the sentences on the paper. Then he put the half-bald brush pen in his mouth and licked it, as if he had tasted the most delicious taste in the world. Unexpectedly, he was so happy that he danced with joy. Ning Kei looked at the old scholar and turned back to look at Chin Pippi in astonishment. He said, "He is indeed reading, but how can watching him read help me to cultivate talisman Taoism?"